Well, I see Ann Austin and Ben Hill. Is this it?
Hi, everybody. Boy,
Hey,
look at Ben. Ben Hill looks awful important.
really?
Yeah, he's got his
Good for
suit
you.
on.
You remember the day, Judge, when you had to dress up?
Come on.
Go Bucks. No, I was
There she
pleased.
is.
But
Oh, there, Cha-Cha.
There's Cha-Cha.
Hey, Paul.
How are you?
I'm fine. Hi, Annie.
Hello, come back, come back. Or maybe you're
Well,
here.
We're here.
Oh, okay.
We're right down the road, kiddo.
And we're just here to comment when our time comes. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm fine.
I'm going to mute us now.
You are.
well, Judge, we at University of Florida couldn't beat Oral Roberts. I hope you all can do it in Arkansas.
Well, we're playing, or we beat them before, you know, and
Right.
that makes it kind of dangerous in the tournament. But
Right.
I'm really surprised at that. Florida's got a good team.
We couldn't score baskets in the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
The momentum is incredible. We were playing Texas Tech and we were ahead by 12 points and they caught up easily within a minute and a half. It was a 1-point game. I mean, just
Right.
back and forth, back and forth. That makes it exciting.
I think Arkansas and LSU are the only two SEC teams remaining, so we're
Alabama,
pulling for them.
Alabama.
Oh, Alabama, right.
Yeah. Which is probably the best of the three.
Roll Tide.
You get you some hot tea.
This is okay. So,
Because I'm gonna get some.
okay,
This is what so.
great. Thanks.
Good. Yeah, that was awful.
Mike, you here?
Yes, Michael, I'm here. And I got us at 5:01, so it'd be appropriate if you wanted to call the meeting to order.
Okay, how many councilmen do we have on so far?
You got 5?
Are we missing anyone?
Hold on, wait, there's Glenn. I see Glenn. I'm not seeing David. David, are you on the call? David Bond?
There's Mark, Bob. Debbie. Debbie, you hearing us all right?
Yep, I hear you just fine.
Okay. Oh, there's Robin. All right, we have a quorum. All right. It's 5:03. Let's call the meeting to order. Does anyone have any additions to or approval? Otherwise, let's have a motion to approve the agenda. Does anyone have any additions to today's agenda?
Michael, do you want to ask about whether or not the board wants to have item C on the agenda? That's still a requested agenda item.
Speak up a little bit there, Mike. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sure, I'll speak closer to Mike. Agenda item C is a request to the board, and you would need to formally add that to the agenda.
Okay.
Michael, I would motion to approve item C.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Okay, we'll need to do a roll call, Michael.
Debbie is aye.
Okay, Mark
Wait.
Lesson.
Going back to item number 1. Sorry, we haven't done this roll call in the past on the Zoom meetings.
Okay.
So let's have a roll call from the council members from, go ahead.
Okay, Mark Letson,
Aye.
Debbie Stewart,
Aye.
Robin Ashmore,
Robin, can you hear us? I saw our Zoom. Unmute yourself, Robin. Can someone unmute Robin, please?
We're working on that.
Can you hear me?
there you are.
Yeah, Robin.
Okay. I was
Okay.
an I.
Okay, thank you. Michael Cox,
Here.
Bob Dews,
Go ahead and unmute him if.
Aye.
thank you, Bob. Glenn
Aye.
Ogerson. Okay, thank you. Okay,
All right, so
that's
we're just-
unanimous.
So we're just meeting. So was that our quorum check, or that was a roll call vote for adding C? I got
Roll call
confused.
vote for adding C.
Okay, great.
C is now
So
added.
there's all right. So no further motions to approve the agenda. The agenda's approved. We've approved item C. Do we have to have a separate motion approving the agenda, Michael? Is Heather on?
No, I believe we're okay to approve the agenda with item C.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
Very
Michael,
well.
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Before we get to number 3, public comment. So several people have signed up to speak today on the, and I have received it as the public comment sign-in sheet. So we need to know if there is anybody who would like to speak in the form of public comment, not related to new business item number 4A, the public hearing text amendment to the UDO Article 9, Section 9.3, which is the text amendment hearing that we're having today. Is there a way?
My comments are more general, not specific for that text amendment.
Okay, Ann, so you're very welcome to speak in that. Is there anybody else that would like to be added to a more general list?
Mr. Chairman, I probably fall into both categories. This is Bob Brown. I speak about the 5,000 square foot limit, but also I have general comments as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Also,
Wait. One at a time. Go ahead, Mr. Yao.
I'm Richard Yao, and I too have general comments as well as would like to mention the 5,000 square foot limit.
Okay, well, if you have general comments and want to mention it, I would say group those in together, and we'll have you in general comments because we're going to have plenty of people speaking within the public hearing. That would be my suggestion for folks. All right, so right now we have Ann, we have Mr. Brown, we have Mr. Yao. Are there anybody else? I heard some other voices.
Yeah, this is Morgan Cloud, and I am just not sophisticated enough in these matters to know exactly where I fall, but I do think my comments, though they touch on the 5,000 feet, are a bit broader, like the other folks who've spoken up. So
Okay.
You put me where you want to.
Okay, so I'll have you in the public comment also. Any other voices?
Yeah, this is Ben Hill, sir, and my comments are general as well as addressing the size issue.
Okay.
Mine
so,
And
so
mine,
where-
Cloud, just a couple of general things to say.
Okay, so
You know,
where do you think you fit better?
You talking to me?
No, my screen switches from person to person. First, Mr. Hill.
Well, I believe my comments are more general than they are addressed to the specific size, but I don't want to take away from that. I do want to address the specific size.
Okay, well, you're more than welcome to speak to both in the public comment, and you can reserve the right to also speak in the public hearing if you so choose. Is that fair enough?
That's fair. Thank you.
This is Jeff Schulman. I'm in the same boat.
Okay.
And this is Maria Partlow, and I am too.
Michael, this is Heather Baker. If I can talk for just a minute.
Yes, go ahead, Heather.
If anybody's going to be speaking on the text amendment, which involves the error and the graphic that's going to be removed, they should wait and speak at the public hearing. If they have comments that are general, that's fine. They can include those there as well. But the general public comment section is for someone speaking on something other than the public hearing. We don't, with so many people speaking tonight, you have other items on your agenda. To be cognizant of your time and the council's time in getting to everything, I don't think you want people speaking at both. It's going to be better if they speak during the public hearing for what they've signed up to do. But if they have general comments that are not related to the public hearing, then that's appropriate to speak at during the general public comment section.
Okay, so in light of what the attorney for the county has just informed me, so, Ann, you were pretty clear that your comments were more general, and Mr. Brown and Yao, like that's where we started to have people say they wanted to be in both. Is there anyone other than Ann who is willing to just make more general comments, was not related to the
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Tim Womack, and I would offer a general comment, please.
Okay. Okay.
This is Craig Pendergrass. Let me make a question suggestion. The topic for the special hearing was very narrowly defined, as if it was only going to be about should the 5,000 square foot limit be eliminated. But I believe almost everybody wants to be saying, if it is to be eliminated, that it should be done so in conjunction with replacement provisions. And so,
right. Well,
excuse me, may I finish, please? Thank you. And in this context of potential replacement provisions, the presentation by Mr. Petrovsky of Stewart is important information for the public to be considering. So I'd like to make a suggestion that, for efficiency's sake, and this is consistent with what Ms. Baker said, would be to frankly just run all the comments in one big section, and then have Mr. Petrovsky's presentation frankly precede the comments, so everybody can have that context of what he has to say. I tend to think that would be an efficient way of addressing.
Good idea.
Thank you very much for that suggestion, Mr. Pendergast. Is there anyone else other than Tim and Ann that feel that their comments are more general and should be in the public comment section? Let's try to bring this to a close and move this on. Okay, so right now I'm going to go with Tim and Ann, and those others that signed up, we're going to hear from them in the public hearing section for the text amendment. All right, so with that being said, I'd like to move on to number 3 in the agenda, public comment. Mr. Womack, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I would like to say that when I was in high school, my mother was on the City of Asheboro Planning Board. I took it when she would go out and do her duties to review the sites. I took it as an opportunity to get into mischief. It was not soon after that I began accompanying her to these missions to go out and review sites that were in front of the board. As time progressed, my mother became known as Whoa Now on the board. And as I say that is that I have a unique eye on planning and how it fits. I also was very integral in the 90s downtown. I was in the business with the Market Basket. I owned my own business where the Orvis store was. At that point in time, I was founding president of the Historic Society. I was also on the board of the Village Green when we voted to allow the Summit Charter School to come here. That makes me not more important than anybody, but it gives me my unique perspective. I am here to challenge the board, many of you who I know personally, to act like my mother and say, whoa now. The rampant growth that is going on here it needs to be just slowed down. We need to take there should not be any go and full stamps. There should be due diligence on everything. And that's my request to the board, is a full due diligence and no just green lights and go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walmer. Do you have any other comments, or does that conclude your comments?
Well, no, I initially signed up to speak about the 5,000 foot limit. And when I understood that was going to be postponed until later, we should not have a building in Cashiers of that size. It's ridiculous what's going on right now at High Hampton. They're at the employees' housing. I mean, that's not even on your radar because it's not in the central business district, but it's in mine because I live downtown. I go by it. I walk the streets of Cashiers. I listen to the noise. I pick up the trash. I try to avoid the traffic. Board members, please be very cognizant. And I ask you to just do the same due diligence to sit and look at the properties and analyze what's really going on, because the law of unintended consequences is a vicious thing once it lets go. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Womack. Ms. Austin.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ann Austin, and I've been involved in historical preservation in Cashiers for most of my life. I've worked with others on the Village Conservancy initiatives, including founding the Historical Society, acquiring and restoring the Zachary Talbert House, the Village Green, McKinney Meadow, Mountain Landscapes Initiative, Cashiers Planning Council, and so forth. We found that most everyone wants to preserve the village character of Cashiers, but if you ask 10 people what that means, you'd get 10 different answers. But I think all would agree that village character is defined in part by its architectural vernacular, for us small-scale historic homes that have been repurposed into successful businesses, restaurants, boutiques, what we call the charm of cottage shopping. In 2011, CHS sponsored 3 historic site surveys to identify and document historic properties in our valley. Phase 1 documented 56 properties, with 19 of them on Highway 107 between the Crossroads and the Methodist Church. The survey included Charlie Hooper's Grocery, which is the Highland Hiker, the Roxy McCall House, Narcissus, Tommy's Coffee Shop, TJ Bailey's now, and the Alexander Building, which is interior enhancements. Tommy's received the Village Heritage Award in 2008, an award giving to a heritage building that has been adapted rather than torn down. Others were designated Village Heritage properties with plaques you've probably noticed around town. As I understand it, a number of these properties are within the boundaries of the proposed hillside development and are slated for demolition. We often hear the argument, but these buildings aren't worth anything. They're not of any great architectural significance, although we do have those too, 3 National Register properties, Zachary Talbert, High Hampton, and the Good Shepherd. Yet in the early days of Cashiers Historical Society, Dwight Young from the National Trust came to visit and inspire us. He told us that often small towns like ours bemoan the fact that unlike the grand cities like Charleston, Savannah, that they had nothing important to show him. They are embarrassed. Dwight Young told us never to be ashamed about what we have. Our village is like no other village, and it's these unique, quirky, older buildings that give it heart and soul. What will we lose when those buildings are gone? So please, let's bring historic preservation back into the conversation when we talk about plans for the future of Cashiers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. All right, before we move on to new business, just bear with me 1 second. I'm gonna grab some documents off my printer. Allison, did you send me a public comment cheat sheet that I missed?
I sent you the public comment recently.
I mean, not public comment, I'm sorry, the public hearing cheat sheet.
Oh, no.
No.
Okay, then if you would just, let's go to item 4A and open the public hearing. And then if you would just, either you or Michael just prompt me on what the next thing is, since I don't have anything to.
Sure.
Oh,
What we'll do is if you don't mind, staff will just kind of set the request, what the request is of the board, and then you can open it to to public comments and just going down that list. And then after we've heard from everybody that would like to be heard, you can close the public hearing, and then we can move to the next agenda item on the list. If that will work for you.
Okay.
Okay. So what staff has brought before you today is, I'll take my mask off to speak. That might make it a little bit easier to hear me. What you have before you today is a technical correction to a graphical error that was picked up during the UDO adoption process. And speaks to a 5,000 building size. I believe Thousand's about to share a screen of that. I think things to note is that we've not ever had an identified maximum building size, and the text of the ordinance does not include a maximum building size limitation. What it does include are square footages that trigger special use permits. And just to further highlight why this would be an error and a technical error. If you look at the maximum structure size of 5,000, there's no unit of measurement actually given as to what 5,000 represents. So it just says 5,000. It actually doesn't actually specify square feet. So again, just another example of why this graphic is an error and not a true reflection of what the ordinance text actually sends or states. So prior to this and existing, staff does not believe there is a 5,000 square foot maximum ever established within the Cashiers district. It's always been a trigger for a higher review process. And that trigger has changed over the years. And the 5,000 was once the trigger for the minimum or the square footage that would trigger a special use permit in the Cashiers general commercial area. And that was changed in 13-14 time period to make that a 1,500 square foot trigger. So we recognize this is a technical error, and Allison, if you'll scroll down to the next. And so what we want to do is clarify that, because there's been some confusion in the community about what actually exists in the ordinance, and where staff's determination is that is a technical error, that there is no maximum building size established in the Cashiers zoning code. And we'd like to request that the council review that. I think we also included in your agenda packet is a letter from Chad Sari of Stewart. And he and Stewart assisted us with the UDO process, and we were able to take a look at, go back and talking with him, and he provided a letter that he too agrees that that is a technical error, and the council should look to correct that. So that's what we bring forward to the council for consideration at this public hearing, is to correct the technical error in the actual graphic that we believe erroneously states that there is a square footage, or there is a maximum size, and to reiterate that the graphic itself does not actually even include a unit of measurement for the 5,000 typographical error. Mr. Chairman, I'll certainly answer any of the council's questions on that if there are any, and I'll turn it back over to you for the public hearing process.
Okay. Is the 30-foot maximum height even correct at this point?
It is not, but at the time of the drafting of the ordinance, it's not really we don't really classify as a technical correction. We do understand with this graphic, it's not an easy graphic for staff to work with and amend. I think we will be further evaluating if there's a better way in the future to convey that information graphically in a format that is easy to maintain over time. But really what we wanted to make sure that we were clear in what we were doing today, which is simply correcting a technical error that never should have been there in the first place. Other parts of that can also be looked at were changed after the adoption of the UDO and would not be considered simply a technical correction.
It was also my understanding that we had never had a maximum square footage size, and in fact, the Brookings building that we just approved exceeded this maximum this non-existent maximum square footage. I believe that was just shy of 8,000 square feet. Do you remember that?
Boys and Girls Club is another example.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm looking at our agenda here, and I'm thankful for all these nice people that have come to share their opinion, and I'm excited to hear it. And I'm glad that folks got organized and hired Jake, that I'm excited to hear from, because he's a smart man. So the only thing I wonder is if this is a text amendment where we are fixing an error in text, and then we have an agenda item to discuss maximum building size later on, how many people that have come to speak today, would their comments be more appropriate if, I mean, people can certainly participate in conversation in some format in another agenda item, correct, Michael?
They can, but this, to be clear, this is a public hearing for this text amendment, and our ordinance requires that we hold this time period to allow folks that would like to speak to that.
Oh, no,
text.
I'm not going to not allow them to. I'm just going to give
Right.
them the option to maybe talk later.
Absolutely. Well, and certainly, we'll hear a presentation about that and various issues that we would most definitely want to probably take a look at the future agenda item and with more discussion from the public. Yes.
Well,
from the public, I have a question. I just have a question. Are we
just a second? Who's this? Who's speaking?
This is Morgan Cloud. I'm sorry.
Morgan. We're not taking questions right now, sir. All right. So our next section, the next thing we go to is to open the public hearing. We've opened the public hearing, and then we start to hear from folks. Is that correct, Michael?
Yes, sir. You can just go and start down your list and allow folks to speak to the process.
Okay. Do we see? Has Jake signed up to speak in this public hearing? I don't see him on my list here.
Jake will speak at the item C. I do believe he's there. He'll speak to item C. This is just for the sign up. So this would be the time that folks that have signed up can now offer their comments.
Okay. So just before we start that, and I'm just going to go in the order of who has signed up, just down this list, and give people a chance to speak. But just with the understanding, please, folks, understand that we're really excited to hear about this maximum building size, and I'm happy to give people a chance to speak in terms of maximum building size later on. But that what we're trying to do is clear up something that was put in an error that we've never before had in the history of this council. And we're trying to clear up a typo. So I don't want to legislate by typo. I'm happy to make good new rules based on public opinion, because that's what we're here for. But anyway, with that in mind, is Michael, just quickly, how would we allow people to speak later? I mean, it's just an agenda item. We could go back through anybody who defers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's going to be up to the council how you want to do that. I think, certainly this is we went through the public comment period and we went through the public hearing, and we're in the public hearing process.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sense. That's all.
Yeah, and so if the council wants to, or you want to allow some ability to speak during that item number C or shortly thereafter, you can look at opening back up public comment maybe afterwards and have some discussion. Again, but we'll want to make sure that we're doing that in an orderly manner so that folks aren't talking over each other.
No, I would go back through the list. I'd allow them to defer now if they choose. Okay, that's my plan. Does anybody else on the council have a problem with that?
No, I don't.
If people choose to defer, they could take their time to speak during agenda item 4C.
Michael, this is Heather again. Just to clarify, if they want their comments on record for the public hearing, they need to speak during the public hearing. I
totally agree with that, Heather.
The meeting is for the council to discuss items on the agenda. I assume since there's going to be information forthcoming, some of which we just saw today with regard to item C, you're going to want to have other meetings maybe for other input on that and allow other people who maybe haven't seen this at all in the community to come and speak on that as well. So something to consider down the road. But if they want to speak during the public hearing and be on record for that, they need to go ahead and do that.
I agree with everything Heather said, so everybody has heard that. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Larry and Jane Thomas. Let's try to keep these to 3 minutes if possible, but this is your chance to speak.
Hey, I'm downstairs and I'm on the conference call.
This is Larry Thomas. in light of the opening comments and your comments, I live at Highway 107 by the Orchard Restaurant, had a residence there since 1988. So we're quite concerned about any developments and increase in traffic in that area. My comments are mostly general, which you referred to earlier. And I simply want to quote the words of Mr. Schaefer, the emeritus for Highlands Historic Society, that was recently quoted by the mayor of Highlands in the March 18 issue of the Highlands newspaper. Dr. Schaefer said, and I quote, "Growth looms more destructive in a village than in a metropolitan area, where it is far less noticed. The stakes are higher in a town like Highlands, and I would add a village like Cashiers, than for larger cities whose residents visit for love of what makes it different than what duplicates life that they come from back home." And I would just leave you with this thought. You don't really truly appreciate what you have and what we have in Cashiers until you lose it and aren't able to get it back. So great care should be taken to prevent any development, including care about the size of any buildings, which would change forever the unique character of our mountain community. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
Sorry, somebody muted me. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Richard Ott.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my name is down as Dick because most of my Zooms are with family, but my name is Richard Ott, and my wife and I have owned a home in the Cashiers area since 1988. And most recently, last September, we became full-time residents. So we have a great interest in what happens in this community. And I'd first like to thank all the members of the council, because I know from my own involvement in my hometown for many years, the job you have is somewhat thankless, frequently thankless when you're trying to please so many people. But I think it's critical that we understand that we all have the best interest of the Cashiers Village. And I would like to basically quote from the code provisions of particular relevance to our Cashiers Village, that under the general purpose of the special districts, it says specifically to preserve the community's unique scenic quality and to protect and conserve the heritage. And I would like to echo everything that Ann Austin said in this regard. However, the fact that the Jackson County Planning Department would have even considered seriously the hillside development makes me question whether or not the general purpose is fully appreciated by all the people who are supposed to be making these decisions. And I'd also like to go to even though you're talking about changing some of the wording on figure 9.2, you're not going to be changing the intention, and that is that buildings shall be small in scale. And a final thing I'd like to point out is that also under the item D, that the proposed use or development of the land will be in harmony with the scale, bulk, coverage, density, and character of the community. So again, I want to echo everything that Ann Austin said, And I can assure you that I'm not alone in the many people that we've gotten to know since 1988 who share that opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ott. Mary Ellis. Miss
Can you
Mary
hear me?
Ellis. Yes, we can hear you, ma'am.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. I'm Mary Ellis. My husband and I have property on Monte Vista Road, which has been in my family since 1897. My understanding of the Cashiers Planning Council is that they represent the interests of the Cashiers community and not the interests of just one out-of-town developer. And I'm referring to the hillside development. By removing the 5,000 square foot limit without replacing it with the well thought out size limit, it certainly would appear that the council is bending over backwards to appease one developer. I think the Cashiers community has made it clear that the majority of us want responsible development and oppose high density, out of control growth. To meet that end, there must be a reasonable building size limit. Do not vote to eliminate the 5,000 square foot limit until there is a well thought out size limit to replace it. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss Ellis. Maria Partlow. Maria?
I'm
if you're
right
there,
here. I'm here.
Hi, Maria.
Hello. Our history is the Hines family's been up here, my husband's family, since the 1950s, and his brother served as rector at Church of the Good Shepherd. And John and I moved here permanently after having a holiday house here a couple of years ago. And we love Cashiers more for what it doesn't have than what it does have. And unrestricted development and things like not having size caps on the buildings is going to open the door to everything that we left behind. So if you're going to take off the 5,000, you need to replace it with something. There's a lot of ugly development around here. The banks, the rec center, strip centers, it's not controlled. And we have a big opportunity in the future with the small area plan already being done to augment that with the ordinances zoning to implement it in a way that keeps our character and our village life intact. We respect our heritage, our historic structures. Our future architecture can be kept in that spirit. And we as the citizens here, we want a voice in this process as we move forward. I'm very interested in what Jake has to say, because we want to help. And I think this recent debacle on the Hill, which we called Cashiers Hillside, has made us a group of very passionate citizens who want to participate in this process. 2027, I understand, is the 100th anniversary of Cashiers. And I think together we can develop a plan for the next 100 years for future generations that will accommodate growth, but will help keep Cashiers Cashiers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Partlow. Bill and Leah Horton, if you would unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Leah Horton. I'm speaking for Bill and myself. Thank you for inviting us to do this. Bill and I are now full-time residents in Cashiers. We've been coming here since the 1970s. And the reason we chose Cashiers is because it doesn't have much. It's a small town, simple, quiet. And my comments are to ask you, the Planning Council, to delay making a decision about this text amendment or any changes to the building codes tonight. There isn't an emergency. You do not have, that we know of, a proposal for development currently in front of you. And so there's time, we can take time to get it right, to do the diligence, to hear from people what they want. I think that a decision to simply eliminate the typo would leave us, and specifically you as the decision makers, with a very difficult job. You could be faced with ongoing special permit requests and conflicts over what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. If you eliminate maximum size, there's nothing really left for you to stop a Lowe's or a Dollar General from buying a piece of property right in the heart of the village and putting a facility on it. If you tried to stop them, just as with Macaulay, one of the issues was that we kept hearing you had to follow the legal ordinance. So if the ordinance suddenly has no limit, you have no protection for your decision-making and ours. And really more importantly to me, as you know, because you've all gotten calls and lots of emails and you've seen the petitions and the letters to the editor, decisions about the future of Cashiers matters to far, far more people than those just with property or businesses in the commercial zones. And the council being only made up of commercial district property owners, the many, many more people who care about the future of our community can't be fully represented by your group making decisions for us. In order for everyone's concerns to be heard, we need public input on this size matter, just like you had from the small plan group in creating the ordinance that we are now using to make decisions on our community. So if you threw out one, why would you not, start fresh? I understand also that the Stewart Company has offered some suggestions on modifications and improvements to the ordinances, and it seems that time should be taken with public input to look at those plans and to get any other professional recommendations you think necessary to make sure we get it right. The long-term future of the kind of town Cashiers is going to be is at stake, and we should not vote to delete, even if it's a typo, the maximum size limit until you've carefully thought through alternative limits to put in place of the 5,000 square feet with public input. Doing so could open the door to development that violates the character and scale of this town. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Debbie and Stephen Clark. Debbie and Stephen Clark, are you on the Zoom? If you are, please unmute yourself. Do we see them on the Zoom?
I don't see them on the list.
Okay. We're going to move past them. Mr. Pendergast? I know Mr. Pendergast is on here because we've heard from him earlier.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm trying to am I on video now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get all set there. So this is repeating a little bit of what's already been said, but to put it into simpler terms, it's just so important for the zoning code to be done right, not rushed. And there is no rush, no reason to rush to eliminate what is in the law, whether a mistake or not, the 5,000 square foot limit, without at the same time replacing it with a well-considered limit. 5,000 square foot limit is actually pretty big. It can accommodate most of the projects that are talked about, and as was said, there's nothing that's pending where it causes a problem. The approval of the Boys and Girls Club in Brookings is safe. More than 30 days have passed since those approvals. And the only way to challenge that is if an appeal is filed within 30 days after the permit is granted. So you do not need to change to get rid of the 5,000 foot limit in order to have those projects go forward. They're not at risk. The ordinance does say, as Mr. Ott said, I think, that a requirement that buildings shall be small in scale. That is called a narrative standard. in law. Narrative standards are best backed by and fleshed out with numeric standards. Numeric standards would be ones that set building size limits numerically by way of footprint limits, impervious limits, floor area ratio limits, and the like. And those are all things that Mr. Stewart is bringing to the table with his presentation. Cashiers would not be the first of the regulated districts in Jackson County to have numeric limits. The Highway 441 Gateway district has floor area ratio limits. Highlands has numeric limits. If you were to eliminate the limit, the 5,000 limit, without replacing it with other numeric limits, then the door stage would be set for a 45-foot high building of limitless breadth. You are protecting yourself from going through more lengthy and painful special use hearings by having numeric limits, because then that serves as a gatekeeper that the planning department would apply before forwarding something to you. It also is good for the development community by giving it numeric standards to work with instead of having to make specious arguments in some cases and good arguments in others about something being small in scale or consistent with the small area plan. It is time to put flesh on the bones of the Cashiers zoning ordinance to bring it into conformity with the small area plan, which is a guidance document, not legally binding. And so again, my suggestion is listen to Mr. Stewart, engage the community, take your time to do this right. I believe that to do it right would be simply a matter of 2 to 3 months, and everybody will feel much more honored and heard and comforted and protected by going through that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prendergast. Susan and Graham Wallet. Susan
Yeah.
Graham Wallet. There we go.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Yes. I'm a homeowner in the Cashiers, what I think is the general commercial district right inside by the crossroads. I bought the home in 2017 to get out of Atlanta and to get away from the chaos in that area. I find myself constantly being bombarded with council decisions regarding development in the area, which I moved here to get away from that. So I'll just say that I oppose the notion of repealing the 5,000 square foot building size limit in both the village center and the general commercial district. I believe that ordinance limitation had to have been mindfully and purposely included to comply with the vision of the Cashiers small area plan and the desires of the surrounding community. I also believe the important limitation was included in the ordinance for several reasons. One, to allow the council to more efficiently approve applications for buildings small in scale, which makes perfect sense. But two, to assist the council in making mindful, unrushed, community-centered decisions regarding applications for building sizes large in scale by calling for public forum or comment, getting community feedback on all large-scale projects under your consideration. Once again, the notion of repealing the 5,000 square foot building size limit without replacement of some limit is contrary to the community interest in, and I quote, buildings shall be small in scale as found in the Cashiers small area plan. I also question whether simply removing that building size limit doesn't give the council power that was never really intended by the ordinance or the community. Finally, as an alternative, just removing the current 5,000 square foot limitation from the ordinance, I ask you to please consider a thoughtful, unrushed collaboration between council and its constituents, along with expert guidance regarding the future building size limitations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Graham. Mary Palmer Dargan.
Hi. Members of the Cashiers Planning Council of the Jackson County Planning Department, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Mary Palmer Dargan, resident and business owner in Cashiers for a couple of decades. And I served on the board of the Village Green and various planning bodies. And my building was in the 2011 Cashiers survey that Ann Austin mentioned. And we were awarded a 2013 Village Heritage Award. And we're really happy about small scale buildings here. It's part of the village character. So the pressures of progress are bombarding our tiny village from all sides. To protect the quality of life we enjoy in this rural mountain village, we really need updated short-term and long-term planning. I mean, it's really desperately needed. The proposed text amendment, which was just to delete the 5,000 square foot maximum building area, is on the table. And seriously, it isn't just a typo. We really do need that recommendation to be offered as a replacement. Our village will otherwise be left unguarded from larger buildings being proposed tomorrow, perhaps by opportunistic developers. So could we please press the pause button, or the whoa now, as was coined by Tim Womack, on eliminating the 5,000 square foot building size? And let's take the time to simply study immediate short-term problems. For instance, like setting a maximum building size, reducing impervious surface minimums, increasing required open space, and a change in special use permits application requirements. They really, I mean, seriously, they ought to include things like traffic impact analysis, demonstration of water and sewer availability, stormwater and grading, et cetera, in addition to the typical subdivision application. We don't ask enough of developers to understand really what their plans are. So I'm a supporter of the Develop Cashiers Responsibly. And I believe that positive development that preserves and enhances the things that makes Cashiers the wonderful community it is, we want to keep it for generations to come. So I really look forward to the presentation by Jake Petrosky of the planning firm of Stewart, which will be at the end of these public comments, because I think it's going to really start a conversation of a thoughtful re-evaluation of the Uniform Development Ordinance, which will simply keep Cashiers Cashiers. Now is the time to shape our community's vision for the future. I thank you for the opportunity to address the council.
Thank you, Ms. Dargan. Susan Benaki and Robert Salveson. Susan?
Yes, we're here. This is Bob Savelson. We would like, if you'll permit it, to defer to Jamie Moran at this point, because, or Paul Anderson, whichever one comes up first on your list, because of the time and effort and work they put into this, and fall back to a later place in line.
No, I'm just going to go ahead and go in order. So this is your chance to speak.
Okay. I'm a newcomer here, and I'm here because I married in. And my approach is a little bit different. I support all of the people who have spoken out and said that the 5,000 foot text should not be deleted unless and until there is a comprehensive review and a report and community participation in just what should be done with the UDO. But I think that my experience in coming here and since I came here is valuable in looking at this. Susan, the first time Susan invited me here, it was almost like coming home again. I'm a New York, Washington person, but I spent a lot of time outdoors in my life and in small towns traveling. And this really was like coming home. There's something special about the environment here that really must be preserved. And that something special could easily run up against any large scale development. So finding a balance with careful review and study and recommendations is really important in terms of preserving the environment here. I'll also report to you that when I spoke with my senior first cousin, who's a Floridian and owns a farm in or near Franklin, and told her that I was marrying Susan, who had a home in Cashiers, she spent about 10 minutes telling me how lucky I was not to be marrying Susan, but to be going to Cashiers. I also found the same when I spoke with people I worked with in Atlanta, some of whom had homes in Highlands. One of them whom remarked, Bob, what the hell are you doing in Cashiers? And when I explained, he said, you'll love it. You're absolutely going to love it because you like the outdoors, you like small towns, you like that type of environment. So I really urge you to take your time. Don't rush. There's something very, very much worth preserving here, and do this the right way, the way you've done it in the past.
Thank you very much. Susan, did you have any further comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you. First, I wanted to thank Michael Poston and Allison Kelly, because I've had some communication with them, and they've been extremely diligent and very responsive, and I think they're just terrific county employees. So I want to thank them for all their hard work. And I know and I know Heather as well, and I know they service the Cashiers Planning Council very professionally. I certainly I support everything that everyone has said. I would urge the council to not make any immediate decision on this 5,000 square foot building size issue without, again, considerable input from the community. And I want to speak to just maybe perhaps the technical aspect of that. It's my understanding that actually you don't have to make an immediate decision. There's no outside limit. Well, I think that Leah Horton said, or someone mentioned, it's not an emergency. It's not just that. There may not, happily, there's no emergency, but it's also true that you do have the opportunity, for instance, to give us, 2 or 3 months, or give the community 2 to 3 months, maybe more, to really get input. And I want to add to that while I did hear you say, Mr. Cox, that this is simply a typo. And I did hear what Mr. Poston said, this is some kind of a mistake, which again, well, I guess without commenting on that, what I would say is it might be viewed as a mistake or a typo to you, but if the public looked at those ordinances, what they saw was 5,000, square feet, or the implication of 5,000 square feet. So this is news to the rest of the public that there's a mistake here. And I think that even Heather Baker might admit, at least I would suggest, that the language that's used in the newspaper to advertise that there's a text amendment, public hearing, et cetera, no one could really understand what it is we're discussing here unless probably this group, the same group that had been following the Macaulay development, they would understand. But the average person is not going to well, what does that mean? It's in legal notices in the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. So I would urge you to give the public a chance to really, the rest of the public who has not been maybe closely paying attention, to understand exactly what's going on, since, as has already been commented, you are a community board, and I think that it's not about making decisions just for the sake of making decisions. It's really about community advocacy, trying to get to projects that people really support and care about, and that improves this village and doesn't really take us in a completely different direction. So again, I would suggest postponing the decision. June, I know you have meetings every month. Perhaps if we put this on the agenda in June, we'd have some time. We'd have all of April, all of May, and some of June to get more input. So that would be my comments. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Nicole Haler.
Good evening. I'm here. Good evening. My name is Nicole Haler. I'm the director of the Chattooga Conservancy, and I'm speaking on behalf of the interests of our members who reside in Jackson County or own property here. I'm also engaged on behalf of our organization's mission that seeks to protect the natural resources and cultural heritage of the Chattooga River watershed. Concerning this mission, Cashiers plays a critical role due to the community's position at the headwaters of the National Wild and Scenic Chattooga River. Now, we know that Cashiers area is experiencing an unprecedented pressure for growth due in part to the anticipated completion of the new sewage treatment plant on the Horse Pasture River. Indeed, the issue before us this evening is directly tied to an aggressive proposal for growth as laid out in the recent special use application to build a mega development at the crossroads in the center of town. Cashiers is now at such a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. Concerning the proposed text amendment to delete the 5,000 square foot maximum building area in the Uniform Development Ordinance, I urge council members to proceed thoughtfully and carefully and to adhere to the guidelines expressed in the 2019 Cashiers Small Area Plan. This plan calls for small to medium-sized buildings and for maintaining the traditional scale of development in the village center. To simply delete the 5,000 square foot maximum building area rule from the UDO without simultaneously replacing it with reasonable constraints as suggested in the small area plan would leave Cashiers wide open for unbridled development that surely would have negative impacts to the unique quality of life values that Cashiers residents hold so dear. I urge the Cashiers Planning Council members to defer and table the proposed text amendment. Further, I suggest that moving forward, appropriate maximum square foot building areas consistent with the small area plan should be determined through a timely, deliberative planning process that includes community input. Rushing to simply remove the 5,000 square foot limit and leave no limit at all would amount to a dereliction of the Cashiers Planning Council's duty and an abdication of the council's trust in serving the citizens of Cashiers. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to council.
Thank you, ma'am. Paul Anderson. Paul, unmute yourself.
I am unmuted, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. You know, somewhere I heard a very wise saying, it was size matters. And in the case of a tiny mountain village of charm and scenic beauty called Cashiers, North Carolina, size matters a lot. And I understand that it may have been an error to include the 5,000 square foot limit in the graphic in the UDO. That being said, I believe that the residents of Cashiers need and deserve to have building area limits in the UDO to guide the planning department and the Cashiers Planning Council in the evaluation of future special use permits and ensure that new development is consistent with the intent and the goals enumerated in the Cashiers Small Area Plan. For that reason, I want to respectfully ask that the Planning Council not act in haste to remove the existing area limit, but to simultaneously enact appropriate maximum building areas consistent with the small area plan and best planning practices, so that in the interim, Cashiers will not be vulnerable to unlimited area buildings, which would be a disaster. As one of the supporters of Develop Cashiers Responsibly, I believe that you, the Planning Council, and we, the residents of Cashiers, have the charge to encourage positive development that preserves and enhances the things that make Cashiers the wonderful community that it is for generations to come. Accordingly, we believe the residents of Cashiers deserve a deliberative planning process that is inclusive of community input to address the current topic as well as other potential improvements to the UDO and special use permit process. To that end, Develop Cashiers responsibly retained the planning firm of Stewart Incorporated to review the current UDO and make limited recommendations for improvements consistent with the provisions and intent of the small area plan. It's been mentioned, and you well know, that Stewart was the firm that facilitated the development of the small area plan in 2019, and they fully understand the intent of that document. Today, I have provided you with Stewart's report and recommendations for improvements to the UDO, which are not intended to be comprehensive, but rather to start the conversation and serve as a catalyst to initiate a thoughtful reevaluation of the UDO that will keep Cashiers Cashiers and shape our community vision for the future. I thank you for this opportunity to address the council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Jeff Schulman.
I am unmuted. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. Thank you to people like Ann Austin, who preserved an amazing place for all of us to come here and live. I'm new to the area. My wife and I bought a home here early January. We have just sold our house in Johns Creek, Georgia, and we live here full time. I've seen this before. I came from a small town in Massachusetts who adhered to their principles and their rules and the intent of what their community was, and it remains a beautiful, undisturbed, pleasant place to live. And I've lived through the growth of places like Alpharetta, Georgia, where I moved there 25 years ago. It was a nice rural community where you could easily commute. You knew people, to a place that removed all of those restrictions, and a place where it takes you 40 minutes to drive 10 miles to get to the highway in rush hour. To think about removing limits like this, I don't know if I agree with the idea that it was a typo. When I read the entire document, this is one of the more specific text boxes where it talks about structure size at 5,000. It goes on to talk about conditional permit use for 1,500 square feet. And I think about the infrastructure. If you remove restrictions like this, what improvements to roads are you going to make? How are you going to increase the fire department, the police department, places that we shop? It's going to make it a place that's going to be completely different and not in line with why all of us moved here.
Is that everything, Mr. Schulman?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Next on our list is Shelby Gannett and Morgan Cloud. I think we heard from you earlier, Mr. Cloud.
Hello. I literally, after sitting, I just went and got a cup of coffee, so I apologize for making you wait. I want to just jump in. I agree with so much of what's been said by this impressive roster of people who've been speaking today that I thought I just would change it a little bit. My wife and I have had a home here since the 90s, and this really is a home to us along with Decatur, Georgia. My wife's family's been here for a century or more, both living here and in a variety of business activities. And so we have a long tradition here and don't expect that this place isn't going to change. And I haven't heard anybody say that. I think everyone here recognizes there's going to be change and development. But I have a perspective on development that's a little different because I used to practice law. And in the practice of law, I represented developers. And I just have to say that from the developer's lawyer's point of view and the developer's point of view, there was a real difference going into any community, but particularly a small town or rural area, in what you could do, and quite frankly, what you could get away with, depending upon the quality of the local ordinances and zoning and the vigor with which the local government bodies who were involved would act to enforce those rules and to protect the broader interest and not just the developers' demands. And so I would just really hope this council will listen to these comments today, suggesting that you see this as an opportunity to develop rules and to develop plans that are of a higher quality than what we have now. And the idea of just getting rid of the 5,000 square foot limit strikes me as kind of the worst choice you could make, just as a government agency, if your intent is at all to protect the interest of the broader community. And I'll just give you an example of why someone earlier, I think maybe it was Craig Pendergrass, made reference to numerical standards. And I want to read you another sentence that hasn't been read from the local ordinance. It says, the purpose of the village center district is established to provide an area for development that will enhance the traditional commercial core of the village. And I think we all respect that. But the last sentence of that paragraph goes on to say, maintaining the traditional scale of development in the village center is an important goal of this commercial district. Now, just think about if you're operating from a standard, even a generous standard like 5,000 square feet as your baseline, and then think about this language from the county staff report about the proposed development that's been withdrawn, but we hear is getting ready to be resubmitted. And this is from the planning department staff report. I'm just gonna pick two things that they said are part of the proposal. Proposed use multifamily 4-story unit, approximate number of units, 121, approximate square feet, 119,350. It kind of makes the 5,000 number seem silly, except for the next one. Proposed use spa, condo, multifamily, 3-story, approximate, excuse me, I have to move this. I have to move my document apartment. Approximate number of units, I don't know, it's like 138 or something. Approximate square feet, 165,600. If you don't have any kind of numerical standards against which to measure numbers like that, I don't know what your basis is. Do you just give in to the developer? You just always say no. And having those numerical standards helps developers plan properly, propose effectively. It helps the community, and it helps you do your job. Now, I have one other thing I want to mention. And I was a little surprised to hear these comments and the kind of various comments about mistakes and things that are in the ordinance that weren't supposed to be there. So, for example, there's this apparent consensus among some people of the council that the 5,000 square foot number isn't square feet, and it was a mistake. If you look at the ordinance, it says structure size, A, maximum structure size greater or less than or equal to 5,000. Now, I don't know, somebody, Mr. Cox or somebody said 5,000 what? We don't even know. Well, you don't have to be an architect to know that it's referring to square feet when you're talking about maximum structure size. In the very next paragraph, in parentheses, right below that, it says, structures exceeding 1,500 square feet footprint, including decks, porches, and other add-ons, require a conditional use permit. As anybody who's used to reading legal text would tell you, this doesn't say a mistake. It says there may be some words square foot were left out, but it's clear what the reference is. I was even more surprised to hear.
Mr. Gannett, if you could, sorry, excuse me, Mr. Cloud, I apologize.
That's right.
If you could, I have 16 more people, and you've been going for 6 minutes. If you could just wrap it up, we're just gonna try to hear from everyone tonight.
I apologize. I I didn't realize I'd been speaking that long. Right below that, it says maximum structure height 30 feet. And Mr. Cox, whoever said, oh, this is another, we don't enforce this. That number, 30 feet, appears again and again. I don't think a fair reading of the text is these are mistakes. These are there for a purpose to provide the kind of guidance that planners, developers, and government agencies need. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you very much, sir. Just before we keep going, I have been a little lenient with people. Some people have been going 4-5 minutes, but as I look what's left of this list, that we have 16 more people. No, excuse me, we have 18 more people, and we've heard from 16 people. So we're less than halfway through hearing folks. So I'm just letting everyone know that I'm going to be enforcing a little more stringently a 3-minute time limitation. So if everybody could try to be as succinct as possible with their thoughts, I'm sure everyone will appreciate that. Moving to Bud and Dina Litowitz.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Bud Litowitz, and my wife Dina and I are residents and property owners since 2013. We love Cashiers. We've been visiting for 15 years. We're active participants in the Cashiers community, contributing our time and resources to initiatives, including development of the new Boys and Girls Club, the Vision Cashiers pedestrian safety sidewalks and dog park projects, and others. We're very concerned about both encouraging and regulating responsible development and growth while maintaining the feel of Cashiers. And what do I mean by the feel of Cashiers? Well, this is what your county commission acknowledged in the Cashiers small area plan, which was adopted in its meeting on March 19, 2019. They quoted their public survey response to the question, quote, what do you like best about Cashiers? And the answer was, quote, small, quiet, friendly, beautiful landscape, cool summers, and lots of recreational opportunities. And during the 3-day charrette developing this small area plan, the picture that received by far the most likes by attendees was a pedestrian-oriented, low-rise, mixed-use village photo, which you can see in the plan report. During the commission discussion before adopting the plan, Chairman McMahon stated that this plan was a, quote, guiding document about overall goals. And the issue today is whether the standards shown in these two figures were typos. Well, in figure 9.1, in the Cashiers Village Center District, the intent and character states, quote, that it maintaining the traditional scale of development in the village center is an important goal of this district. And it limits structure size to be less than or equal to the 5,000, we all know it's square feet. Let me repeat, the intent and character states, maintaining the traditional scale of development in the village center is an important goal of this district. No other goals were mentioned. In the general commercial district figure, the intent and character, quote, caters to the motoring public while acknowledging the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers. In honoring this intent, the district standards limit structure size to the same, maximum of equal to or less than 5,000. Let me repeat, the intent and character acknowledges the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers. Saying that in not one, but both districts, that the 5,000 square foot maximum is a typo, I think would render the language of the intent and character in both of these districts meaningless. And maintaining the traditional scale of development and acknowledging the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers were your words, not ours.
Mr. Litowitz, that's
Yes.
3 minutes, sir. Thank you very much. Moving on to Jamie Moran.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for serving our community. My husband and I owned a house about 25 years ago in the Cashiers area, and we sold it. and proceeded to try to find another cute little village like Cashiers, and here we are again. So we traveled all over North Carolina to do that, and I think that speaks volumes about Cashiers. You are the guardians of Cashiers, and I hope you hear us as support of your decisions, because you're there to keep us and keep our community, as we've been talking about, in character with the Cashiers we love and know. So I would ask that as we're thinking about growth and development, which is very healthy, that you also think about correcting and replacing this, typo with thoughtful guidelines on building size and use. So thank you for your time, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moran. Next, I have Mr. Richard Yao. Richard? Mr. Yao, there you are.
Thank you very much. I am following great speakers, wonderful community leaders, and thoughtful friends and members of this area. I really can't add much, but I do want to say that this is a community mostly of first and second homeowners. And if we turn it into a tourist destination, it's going to change the character of the town. Love tourists, love business. Yes, we do need sidewalks. We need pedestrian flow. We need many things, but we do not need Gatlinburg here in Cashiers. Let's be mindful of what we have. Let's appreciate where we are, and let's enjoy the outside and not bring a lot of lights that make the things that we want to see invisible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yao. Mr. Robert Brown.
All right, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the council. I am Bob Brown, a retired justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, and I've been coming to Cashiers for 63 years. Initially, I would come because my dad would preach at the Church of the Good Shepherd during the month of August, and our whole family would come stay in the house adjoining the church and have all the benefits of High Hampton. But now my wife Charlotte and I own a home on Chattooga Wood Road, and we have inherited that from my dad. As second homeowners and part-time residents, Charlotte and I cannot begin to compare our roots in Cashiers to those whose families have poured their blood and sweat into this community for generations. They are the true bedrock of Cashiers. It is their history and culture that make Cashiers what it is. And I applaud what Ann Alston is doing in that respect to preserve that history and culture. Cashiers is at a crossroads. Our beloved community is facing an assault of intense population growth and has been for some time. But now, in addition to that, that is people exiting the cities due to the pandemic and unrest, an increased number of professionals want to work remotely from their cities in comfortable situations like Cashiers. It is critical, and I stress critical, to have a uniform commercial building standard in place to accommodate this growth. Now is the time for more standards, not for less standards. Today, the council meets to declare a commercial building standard of 5,000 square feet to be a typographical error. I asked the council, like so many others have asked, what will replace it? The 5,000 square foot standard has been the rule of thumb for commercial buildings for some period of time. And I urge either the council to adopt the 5,000 square foot limit and make that the uniform standard applicable to all new commercial construction, or failing that, I urge the council to adopt a new standard for commercial buildings based on input from experts that we've already alluded to, and the people of Cashiers. Without a uniform standard applicable to all new buildings, every commercial developer will be able to build their buildings at their own whim. The floodgates will be open and a hodgepodge of oversized buildings will be the result. I guarantee you in 20 years, if that's the case, Cashiers as we know it today will be unrecognizable. And it is only fair that all builders play by the same rules. I'm sure that some builders in the past have followed the 5,000 square foot rule, even though it was a rule of thumb, according to some.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir. Carolyn Cannon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to shorten what I was going to say. My name is Carolyn Cannon, and my husband Chris and I are relative newcomers, and we now have 2 properties in the Cashiers area. Our permanent residence has been Charleston County, South Carolina. So we are no strangers to overdevelopment and constant construction. And all the discourse that goes along with it, and the changing of the community. So we decided to come to Cashiers because of its charm, and we've fallen in love with it. So we're a little bit saddened to see what may be coming down the line. I thank each of you that serve on this planning committee, and I implore you to slow down and take the time and collaborate with our community to help reestablish these guidelines. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk. Every voice, no matter how loud or how soft, is just as important as every other voice. And I think in the time of such divisiveness that inclusivity and being transparent is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ms. Susan Gregory.
Hi there. So,
hello, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you all. I do appreciate the Planning Council and all the effort you're putting into it. I know that so many people before me have been so eloquent, and I will try to keep my comments brief. My grandparents are the reason that I visit this area. They purchased property in 1958 in the Glenville area, which means 4 generations of my family have enjoyed coming to the plateau. And I've personally been coming to the area for 53 years. So I'm here tonight to ask the Planning Council to keep our heritage in mind and the wishes of the community that we honor Cashiers, not Cashiers, by ensuring that we retain the existing character of Cashiers, which is a quaint, friendly mountain town by design. By design, by design. Because all of the surrounding areas, which might include Highlands and 411 and Cullowhee, Sapphire, they all have size limits. I'm not convinced that this is a technical error. I find it difficult to believe that our code would have no limit. Perhaps the mistake was in omitting the words square feet after the 5,000 number. I oppose repealing the existing limit, as we certainly need the limit. And I urge the council to adopt the 5,000 square foot limit. I agree with Mr. Cloud that a fair reading of the text does not support this as a mistake. But if the council is going to insist tonight that it is in fact a mistake, let's not make another mistake by repealing it without replacing it with an appropriate size limit, which cannot be done tonight. That needs community input. It needs professionals and residents to review the small area plan and the UDO, working together to avoid another mistake that quite frankly cannot be undone by the stroke of a pen or a keyboard. So I want to urge the Planning Council to table any decision. There's no rush to repeal the text tonight. And I have one general comment. Again, having come to the area for 53 years, I think there needs to be a permanent seat on the Planning Council for an historical society member to balance the community interests and our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gregory. Mr. Bob Bramlett. Bob, are you able to unmute yourself, sir? Allison, do we see him in the list?
I'm not seeing him on the list.
Okay, well, if he's not in the list, it's going to be hard for us to hear from him. All right, Bob, speak now. Okay, moving on from Bob, Laura Flaherty. Miss Laura Flaherty, go ahead and unmute yourself, ma'am.
Yes, this is Laura Flaherty. Thank you. My husband and I have been residents of the area since 2013 when we built a home here. And I am basically going to be echoing what has been said so far, especially emphasizing move slowly. I would ask that the council move slowly. You do not need to make corrections to that typographical error until there's a well-considered plan to replace it. Also move slowly so that you can continue to give citizens a voice in any future decisions and looking at building size and coming up with something that is consistent with the vision of the Cashiers small area plan. And another reason to move slowly is that you can get the expert advice that will help make all these decisions that will keep our community such a special place to live. I mean, I can't help but thinking when I was listening to everybody right now of some lines from a Joni Mitchell song. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. We don't want to see that happen here. But I thank you for this opportunity. I echo what everyone has been saying. Please move slowly, allow citizens to talk, listen to experts, take your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flaherty. Next is Miss Helen Harmon. Helen, if you would unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Helen Harmon. I've been coming to this area since 1971, and we own 2 parcels of property in Cashiers, and I vote in Jackson County. You simply cannot emit a maximum building square foot size, and because that is no way to continue responsibly developing this beautiful community. The Cashiers small area plan called for buildings to be small and medium in size. It also called for maintaining traditional scale of development in the village center. Village is in its name. The VC is in the name. Let's keep it a village by having a discussion on a reasonable maximum structure size. We want to enhance the commercial core, and what has been presented at the previous council planning meetings, Cashiers Planning Council meeting, would erode the village field. It is imperative to set a maximum square foot limit before going forward considering any future development. And I personally find it disingenuous for anyone to suggest that 5,000 was a technical error, or that we cannot, a reasonable person cannot infer that 5,000 is in square feet. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate each of you and the time and service you give to our community.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harmon. Next on our list is Dan and Maria Chasins. Dan or Maria?
Thank you.
Hi, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks to the council. My name's Dan Chasins. I'm a full-time resident here, having owned property here since 2002. Although I am not speaking for my homeowners association, I am the head of the homeowners association of the High Meadows community on Found Forest Road. And I can say with some confidence that the recent sequence of events, including the now withdrawn development, has created substantial alarm amongst our group, not just in full-time residents, but those who are part-time residents as well. So I would like to add my voice to the others, asking council not to delete the 5,000 square foot limit without a thoughtful and well-considered replacement for that, whatever that should turn out to be. One of the reasons for that is that, as I see it, having read the ordinance and tried to be as aware of all the history as I can be, it's one of the only levers and reinforcements for the spirit of what the ordinance is actually trying to do. And some of the passion that we've seen and the amount of activism amongst everyone in the community can only reflect the degree of concern that came about with the recently proposed development at the crossroads, which certainly had virtually nothing whatsoever about it that was within the scale envisioned by the small area plan or the ordinance. So, I think I can have a lot of sympathy for members of council who are doing good work on behalf of the community. But I also think it's important to note that a council of this type should listen to the voice of the community. And I would point out that just like everyone else who's speaking this evening, everyone actually has standing in this matter, notwithstanding the technical details of a request for special use. Those who live here, whether it's full-time or part-time, work here, pay taxes here, and yes, support local businesses, all have strong opinions and well-considered opinions about what makes Cashiers a great place to live and want to preserve that. And I think there are many, many ways that that can be done with a thoughtful process. So with that, I would just like to encourage council to use that thoughtful process and not replace the 5,000 without a good substitute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chasins.
May I speak also, Mr. Chairman? This is
Go
Maria
ahead,
Chasen.
Go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank the council again. You folks are doing what you have to do, and I'm sure right now it's a rather thankless job, but it's an important job in that you have to reflect and represent the community, and we appreciate your efforts on that behalf. As my husband said, we have been living here full-time now for a number of years, and it seems to make sense, rather than just eliminating the 5,000 square foot limit, to be proactive and put limits in place that make sense. To just do away with that number and let it be infinity does not seem to be in keeping with the characterization of a small scale, that buildings should be small in scale. What is small? Is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 100,000 plus, as I think it was Mr. Cloud mentioned? And there's really no need to rush. The decision that is going to be made to replace that number, whatever, is going to affect the community for generations and decades to come. And to try to speed that process up just for the sake of having a number in there doesn't seem to make much sense. I think it was Laura Flaherty who said, slow down, slow down. And it does make sense to make a decision that is well thought through rather than in haste. And so I would echo everything that has been said by all of the other speakers. Susan Gregory was very eloquent, as was Leah Horton. I mean, everybody has said wonderful things. And basically, please do not eliminate that 5,000 number without replacing it after careful and deliberative decision making. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next on my list is Ben Hill. Ben, if you would unmute yourself. Mr.
Yes,
Hill.
sir, I have.
Go ahead. There you are, sir.
Okay, my name is Ben Hill, and together with my wife, Marty, we have been in Cashiers as a part-time resident since 1999. We have every intention of retiring here. And prior to coming to Cashiers, we did a survey like so many of you that are relatively new. We did a survey of other mountain towns, and we found it very easy to settle on Cashiers. We settled on it because of its small town character, because of the people that we met in this community, and all of those people are echoed by the 32 or 33 people that are scheduled to speak tonight, and all have in the same interest, that is to preserve what it is that Cashiers really is not. Cashiers is not Atlanta. Cashiers is not Gatlinburg. I'm from Tampa, Florida. Cashiers is not Tampa. Cashiers offers not only outstanding beauty, but Cashiers offers the ability to live in a small town that we hope to keep it small. Now, it's not a question of us hoping to keep it small. It's a question of the studies that have been done and the ordinances that have been done with respect to Cashiers. The small area plan clearly talks about smallness and scale. The actual special use standards, standard number 4, I believe it is, or excuse me, standard number D out of the 6 standards says that the use will of anything that qualifies for a special use permit, the use will be in harmony with the scale, bulk, coverage, density, and character of the community. There is no question, but that subjective standard refers to size as well as density and other characteristics. I support what Mr. Pendergrass said. We need to have objective standards to enable our planning staff to grade future permits or future requests for permits and grade it against a number. If 5,000 is not the right number, then we need to pause and we need to study and come up with the right number. I will suggest to you, as Mr. Poston is quoted as saying in the Cashiers Chronicle, Mr. Poston says there's been a lot of ideas promoted or set forth with respect to this. There has been a lot of good ideas. It deserves further study. So I'm here to say to you that we now have a huge outcry from the community at large. We've heard huge numbers on a petition. That is a good sign that Cashiers has awakened to what we need to do in the future. And I would urge this council that is working so hard to preserve Cashiers that you pause, that we defer this until we have time to study it further and come up with the right answer so that in the future we will be judged by right standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Moving on to Mr. Glenn Cox. Mr. Cox, I like your name.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the council for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Glenn Cox, and I would like to join the others who have spoken in opposition to deleting the 5,000 square foot building limitation without there being some replacement therefore. I live in Ganasita, and I've been a part-time resident of Cashiers for over 40 years. Needless to say, the impact of future development in Cashiers is of a significance important to me, both in maintaining my property values as well as the lifestyle that I've been lucky enough to enjoy over those years. I believe that having some building limitation as to buildings limits the is a critical element of the nature of future development. It is my understanding that the basis for removal of the 5,000 foot limit is a typographical error. But even so, logically, there must have been the intent in the original small area plan that it contained at least some square footage limitation. And towards that point, shouldn't the 5,000 square foot be left in place until it can be replaced with a new limit that reflects the community's vision of what is most likely to retain the character and the ambiance of our village? to replace a stated limit with absolutely no limit appears to be a bit illogical and clearly unnecessarily hurried. I think that removing the current limit without a replacement would be at odds with not only the spirit of the Cashiers small area plan, but potentially even some of the strategic initiatives of our Chamber of Commerce. And therefore, I would respectfully ask the council not to delete the current limitation, but rather hold off until a future meeting when an appropriate replacement, after considering full community and professional input, can be agreed upon. I thank the council for the work you've done. I understand that it is a thankless task, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak and taking my request into consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. Next on the list, Miss Deborah Bryant. Ms. Bryant. Debbie, if you'd unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, there you are. Go ahead.
Yes, hello to everybody, and I am very thankful to be here and have my voice heard. I appreciate everything everyone else has said. Especially, I want to say I like what Nicole had to say from the Chautauqua Conservancy with her environmental concerns about this project. So my husband and I have lived and worked in this community since 1984. We own and operate 2 small businesses. We've raised our 2 children here and have contributed our time, talent, and money to many community building efforts, including the Village Play, Summit Charter School, and the Good Shepherd Bazaar, among others. We've paid our taxes and supported the local economy. We are invested in this community, and we care about the people and the precious land and the water within it. Speaking for myself, I do not wish to see this outsized development smack in the middle of our quaint village. It would be too dense and create untold nightmares on our roads, in the grocery store, at the post office, not to mention being a potential eyesore where there once stood lovely trees. I understand the lure of a large development may seem tempting to realtors and retail businesses, and even to the building trades at first glance. But I believe it would end up hurting all of us in the long run. It could destroy the character of our natural charm of our village, which includes the quirkiness of many of the historical structures in our area. This charm is what draws people here in the first place and benefits our local businesses. I'm not against any growth. In fact, I welcome well thought out improvements to our town that fit in with the overall look, especially if there's a benefit to the community. I hope that we can improve recreation choices for youth and perhaps more protected green spaces that would benefit everyone, keeping as many trees as possible. With all that said, I would like to oppose any change or removal of the 5,000 square foot building code without a simultaneous replacement plan, which is thought out and reflects the character and the size of Cashiers. Perhaps you, the Planning Council, can wait until June or a future meeting to consider a development plan that will enrich the community and have adequate professional involvement.
Ms. Bryant.
Sticking to the small area, please.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you. Miss Laura King.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thanks for listening to all of us, and I would say ditto, ditto, ditto to everybody that's spoken already. My name's Laura King, and along with my husband Roger, we've been second home owners since 2015. Love this little 2-light town. We looked at homes in both Highlands and Cashiers and settled on Cashiers lured by the lack of commercial activity and the quaintness and quirkiness of the Cashiers village. And just coming, we're from Houston. We have so much traffic. There's so much development. It is a treasure to come to a two-light town and just decompress. So I really hope that you guys will take your time in making this decision on growing Cashiers. And please let the community have a lot of input into this because it is very special. And you don't realize how special it is until you lose it. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next on my list is Miss Linda Stone.
Okay, hi. Well, I could just quote or say ditto to every single person, especially Laura, who just spoke. My husband and I have had homes in Cashiers since 1999. And I am so in awe of this special place. And I think largely it is because of the people, these speakers today who made me cry. You are so passionate, as am I, about keeping Cashiers, and every reason that you brought up. You are the backbone of Cashiers. Thank goodness for our backbone. One of the first speakers, y'all are going to love this, called himself Mr. Whoa and said, slow down in planning and do careful, sensitive planning. And I'm going to quote him. I'm not going to go on and on because y'all said it all. But I will say that I'm totally in favor of your defeating this text amendment or whatever it is called. And not to be outdone by Joni Mitchell, but my favorite, John Denver's song said, we do not need more scars upon the land. And that is what this proposed development would be. So thank you, councilmen and councilwomen, for doing your job in protecting our precious village. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Next on our list is Mr. Tom Van. Tom, if you would, Mr. Van, unmute yourself. Allison, is Mr. Van on our list? In our list?
Yeah, I see him on there on his iPad.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
There you are.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
To echo previous comments, I'm asking the council to postpone a decision to correct an assumed 5,000 square foot error until a replacement ordinance has been studied, vetted, and is ready for adoption. My hometown is Thomasville, Georgia, and it received national recognition for its historic downtown of brick streets and Victorian storefronts. I lived there for over 60 years. I practiced law there for over 40 years. So I saw the preservation process firsthand, and it was not easy. The driving force of leadership came from individuals like the outstanding people who have spoken here this evening, and wonderful charitable organizations like those represented here tonight. Developers, of course, wanted unregulated freedom to build to suit their profit goal. A good developer is like the fullback on a football team. His objective is to run over every obstacle between him and the goal line. But here in Cashiers, prominent citizens concerned for the future welfare of Cashiers and its inhabitants are not asking you to stop development. They're asking you to take the time to do it right. And they've invested their money to retain a municipal planning firm to develop recommendations for amendment to the Cashiers zoning ordinance. So I say there's no harm in listening to the residents and the professional planner financed by them. I can tell you from personal experience, you will never regret a decision to listen to your constituents who have no profit motive in mind, only the welfare of the Cashiers community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van. Ivy Cooper.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
I have no desire to repeat over and over what everybody said, but want to just state my concern and that you will refer to
Ivy, are you able to hear me? There might be something wrong with your internet connection. If you'd like to close your connection and try to, is it possible that she reconnect? Because we are having a lot of trouble hearing her.
Yeah, we can come back in. I'll admit her again.
Ivy, just wait. Try. I might be hearing you a little better. Go try again, Ivy.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Try again.
Okay. So I just wanted to state my concern, simply omitting the 5,000 number, and please consider holding off and referring to what the Stewart firm has to say and replacing it with a considerable number. I also just wanted to state that I may be representing a slightly different group than many other people that have spoken. That I moved here 7 years ago with my 2 little boys, and my husband and I chose this place to raise our children. Yeah, because we think it has merit. Many of the reasons that were not stated, but also for raising our children, and we plan to be here for a really long time. Hopefully our children will raise their children here as well. So just saying that from that perspective as well, this is where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cooper.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
This is Allison. I got an email from Katie Miller next on the list, as well as Laura Moser. They both said that they do not want to make a public comment.
Okay. Very well. Does anyone on the council need a break before we continue on with this, or is everyone good to keep plowing along?
Keep going.
Okay. All right. Heather?
Michael, you may just want to, if everyone's spoken and had a chance to speak, you may just want to formally close the public hearing.
Close the public hearing or close the public comment?
Well, it'd be the public hearing. And then you can discuss, because everyone from the public has had a chance to make their comment.
I don't have the outline in front of me. So at this point, we will, are we able to ask questions of anyone that we choose to after we close this, Michael?
Yeah, this isn't quite like the special use permit process. So, I mean, you're just, and Heather, do you want to jump in there? I don't think, if you have a specific question for someone, you may want to go ahead and ask it before the public hearing.
Yeah, procedurally, Michael, you close the public hearing since you've gotten through all the comments, and then move back to your agenda. And if it's an item for discussion on the agenda, you can discuss it. Although remember that because this is a remote hearing, you cannot take a vote on this tonight. You've got the 24 hours to allow for additional public comment before a vote can be taken. But you can have it on for discussion if you want to ask questions of somebody.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So at this point, we will close the public hearing. So this question is for Heather and Michael. Jake is here on the Zoom call. Would I be allowed to ask him a question about this at this point? I understand that he's presenting later.
Michael, you can ask him a question. I would just ask, depending, if it's on the UDO or something, he is from Stewart, but a different division than worked on the UDO. But yes, if you have a question for him and he's here and willing to answer, he can answer.
He's not from this division that we have this memo from Chad Sari.
No, of course he works with Chad. You're welcome to ask him your question anyway, but just to point that out, we worked with one group for the UDO, and then we worked with Jake and his group for the small area plan for both Cashiers and Cullowhee.
Okay. All right, then I'll just leave Jake unless another council member has a question for him. I'm just, so now it's the council's time to discuss what we've heard. I'm struck by the irony of this, that like we're going to hear from Stewart when I have this letter from Stewart saying that figure 9.1 and 9.2 was drafted in error and should be corrected. I mean, and I'm really, personally, I'm very encouraged about all this participation, because I remember when we had these meetings and nobody, not even the newspaper, would show up. And I'm excited with all this interest that we can have a very worthwhile discussion about maximum building size and Cashiers and all the other parts of our ordinance, because I want it to be as reflective of what the community wants as possible. But at the same time, I personally am not in favor of us having language out there that says two separate things, and one thing that has never been based on the text of our ordinance. Are there any other thoughts from other members of the council? And how is this going to look, Michael? Are we to discuss it and then we're to call for a vote, or to call to table it, or some kind of motion one way or the other? Is that how you anticipate this going?
Yeah, so you can choose to discuss it, today. You can, you can't make a decision today on one way or the other. As Heather mentioned, there is a minimum of 24-hour period that you have to wait. Later on, as opposed to an adjournment that you normally see on our agenda, we have a recess meeting. Mm-hmm. So you can ask questions today. You can table it to the recess portion of the meeting when you have that date to discuss. And remember, part of the reason that 24-hour period exists is to allow for additional comments to be sent to the Planning Council for consideration. I think you can manage it either way. But certainly, if there's not any discussion right this minute, doesn't mean that when we reconvene that there might not be some more questions that you have, or more discussion to be had at that time.
Michael, is this memo from Chad Sari, AICP practice leader, municipal planning vice president at Stewart, is this publicly available?
Yeah, it went out with our agenda and should be out there. Okay.
And you presented it earlier in saying that it was their recommendation that we should correct this error, that the only time the 5,000 square foot was as a trigger for a special use permit in the initial drafting of the ordinance, and that we've always had these limits to trigger special use permits, but there's never in the text ever been a size limit.
Correct. And we'll go back and I don't know if Allison, you have that, and we can talk about this more, but in the original, not the letter, I don't know if we have that one that I saved to the jump drive. Yeah. Okay. So when the graphics first appeared in the mid 2000s in the ordinance, it simply just stated what the trigger was to right there, number 1 at the top. Sorry, we're gonna put this up there. Yeah. So this is what the graphic used to look like, and then this is just an example. And Allison's going to share the screen on that. So the graphic, and scroll down, Allison, for me. So if you'll notice on structure size, it just says structures exceeding 5,000 square foot footprint, including decks, porches, and other add-ons, require conditional use permit. That's the language that had always been in there. And if you remember, and I know most of you were on the council during the UDO process, our goal was simply to take 22 ordinances and fit them into a framework document. And we weren't going to make any big policy changes at that time for fear that those changes might get lost in the conversation. And some of those might be ones that the community would have a good deal of interest in. So, based on the documents and the history of the ordinance never actually called out and delineated a maximum square footage. What it did was what has changed over time is the threshold by which we require a conditional or special use permit, and that's where you see some of these. That's I think where we find the 5,000 coming in the drafting process, and why again we believe to be in error because we've never, the councils have never passed a maximum building size. And historically, what they have done is created a triggering mechanism that required a higher level of review, as opposed to just making it all administrative review. The conditional use permit or special use permit requires a council review those standards found in the ordinance, which several folks quoted about the about the development being in harmony and scope and scale of the community. So that's how the ordinance structure has been set up over the years.
Okay. Allison, are you able to put this Stewart memo up on the screen?
Can you see it?
Yeah, I think we're able to see it. So this is the thing that that I'm so focused on, because I have it right here in front of me, and I'm just trying to, as a councilman, be responsible. And obviously, with this amount of community interest, I think it's a responsible thing to, begin a process to discuss and look into and listen to relevant experts. And obviously, we're going to hear from one tonight about, the possibility of a maximum square footage size. But we have the company that was actually hired to port these documents over, saying that this is the whole history of this topic, and that it wasn't supposed to be there. It was in error and should be corrected. And I understand why folks have grabbed onto this, and I'm really encouraged by the participation. But I just, this part of it seems pretty cut and dry to me. John, are you available to speak, Mr. Jelenevsky?
Yep, I'm here.
I mean, John, you're the one that regularly reviews these applications for the Cashiers Commercial District. I mean, and you have been for how many years, would you say?
I've been here almost 9 years.
Have you ever applied a 5,000 square foot size limitation?
No.
No. And how many of the last several projects that we've approved have exceeded this? I mean, it seems like most of the things we look at do.
The Boys Girls Club, Brookings, the Village Green building, which you recently had meetings at, is over 5,000 square feet. We did an expansion to the Baptist Church several years ago, which was all over 5,000 square feet. Matter of fact, most of the churches in Cashiers are over 5,000 square feet. We were involved with the rec center, which is obviously considerably more than 5,000 square feet. The expansion of the fire department made it over 5,000 square feet with that expansion several years ago.
Maybe the only one that wasn't was Mike Benitez's building.
Right. They weren't. Of course, he's got multiple buildings now that would, the total square footage would be over 5,000 square feet, but the individual buildings themselves.
I'm just talking about the white one that's on the corner of Burn Street and Frank Allen.
Yeah, it's less than 5,000.
All right. Well, I was just making sure that I hadn't missed anything and you hadn't been applying a 5,000 square foot maximum. All right. Are there any? So, Michael, what's our procedure here? We would just kind of leave this and move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, you can table this item and when you consider recessing the meeting, pick it back up at the time that the meeting recesses.
Okay. Do any of the other members of the council have any comments prior to us tabling this agenda item? Any other members of the council? Okay, so at this point, we will table agenda item 4A until after we pick the meeting back up, and we will move on to agenda item 4B, approval process discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We discussed at the last meeting, although briefly, about what we've heard from not only the Cashiers community in regards to the quasi-judicial approval process, but also from our other regulated districts, including the Cullowhee regulated district and 441 regulated district, that discussed the rigid nature of the quasi-judicial process and the limited ability to for the community to be involved in the decision-making process or in that, and that the quasi-judicial hearings are not quite like this public hearing that we had tonight, where everyone could participate, but quasi-judicial require you to have standing. So we wanted to talk to the council a little bit about looking at possibly moving towards a more legislative, a more open community process. It's called conditional zoning. It's much like it is basically a rezoning process, but gives you the ability to discuss higher thresholds of standards to be met with the developer, and gives you more ability for community input, not only during the hearing process, but we can also build in tools to make that conversation happen prior to the application being submitted to the department. So what I've included for your review and consideration is a couple documents. One is just happens to be a column that came in out of the Asheville Citizen-Times talking about scrapping the quasi-judicial hearing process. Hopefully you guys have had, the council's had a chance to read that. Just we wanted to put this out there, just information about what the differences are in our approval processes. What we also included for your review is a blog post from David Owens, and David Owens is with the School of Government from UNC Chapel Hill, and communities make use of the School of Government in discussing some of these the land development concepts, and really is a great resource for us. And they've got a blog out, and they talk about just what the different choices are in approval processes. And there's three main. There's we all know about quasi-judicial. That's the one that we discuss on a every so often we have meetings. We have the quasi-judicial process. You've been through that. Everybody understands what the administrative approval process is, which is that there are under certain circumstances called out by the ordinance. Not so much in Cashiers because the conditional or the special use permit threshold is so low, but there are things that get approved on an administrative basis. Those are pretty straightforward items that are in the ordinance that say you shall have X, Y, or Z, and staff can check those boxes and issue permits when appropriate. And the third type is your legislative type of decision-making process, and that's where conditional zoning falls into play. And conditional zone, so what we're asking and what we're discussing is, there are certainly pros and cons to all these types of approval processes. I think the one with conditional zoning, allows for the most participation by the community in the process. And depending on how you build your ordinance, you can actually build it to where you have more of that community conversation prior to an application being heard and prior to the time that it would go before a board for a hearing process. Interestingly enough, the village of Forest Hills, which is down adjacent from Western Carolina University, has recently put that standard or that tool into their ordinance, and they have some requirements of what needs to be accomplished prior to a formal submittal. I think that currently we have some conditional language in the Cullowhee ordinance. It's more optional and not required. I think that if you're going to move from a special use permit approval process and a quasi-judicial approval process, everything that triggers that would trigger then a rezoning process. And I like I mentioned before, I think some of you have more latitude in the conditional zoning process to be able to negotiate some of these standards to higher standards for the community to ensure that it does fit the small area plan and make sure that it fits with those standards. Because in the rezoning process, you would address how it's consistent with the small area plan and other planning documents that are addressed. So the Coley Planning Council, we talked to them about this at their last meeting, and they've asked us to start moving forward to presenting more information and how something would be set up. So we wanted to come to the Cashiers Planning Council and talk to the council members about if this is something that they're interested in moving forward in and discussing, and learning more about the process and language and what it would look like if they wanted to move more towards conditional zoning process. The biggest difference is the quasi-judicial process. Well, not the biggest. One of the differences is, that the council on the special use permits, the council is the ones that ultimately make the decision. In the legislative process, remember, this will be like everything else in legislative. You're an advisory board, and there will be a public hearing at the Cashiers level, a true public hearing, and then there would also be a public hearing at the commissioners level, and the commissioners would ultimately make the decision. So that's just some of the differences between the three types of approval processes. I'll stop there, and I know this is kind of broad, but I can answer any questions that the council may have about the process. And Heather, certainly, if you have any additional thoughts on the different approvals, please feel free to chime in.
So let me just clarify one thing real quick, Michael. So what we have now, and then there was one where an advisory board with public hearings, and the inevitable, I mean, even our authority comes from the county commissioners, but the vote would be taken at the county commissioner level. And what was the intermediate option that you discussed?
Well, then the other option is administrative approvals, and that's and certainly I don't know that I would sit here. I'm not going to recommend that the council consider administrative approvals for larger projects. I think you either want to have that in a special use permit or a conditional conditional district approval that gets considered by the boards in that manner. So I think those are the three basic types of approval processes: administrative, administrative in a lot of our other areas where we issue permits for residential houses. That's a good example of administrative approval. You've got the setbacks, you've got everything that you need to meet is established in the ordinance, and staff just confirms that those things are met. We issue a permit without going before a board or council. With some of our more complex requests, we do go to boards and councils for approval processes, and both the quasi-judicial process and the conditional zoning process are two options of how boards and councils approve larger projects. Heather, do you want to jump in and
well,
yeah,
Heather,
let me
ask you, as you start to talk, I mean, we have administrative approval for anything less than the square footage trigger now, correct?
Correct.
That's correct. And to clarify one thing, Michael, the council would vote at this stage. So in the legislative process, you would have a vote, you would have the hearing. But basically, this is we've been hearing about this from Coley over the last couple of years. And certainly with this latest development in Cashiers, we heard loud and clear from the Cashiers community as well that the community wants to have more involvement in these hearings. In a quasi-judicial setting, legally, we can't do that. There's no way. You've got to follow the law. And there are really extreme risks to the county for not following the law and procedure to a T in those hearings. So the way to open that up and to have more communication involvement from the community is to have this as a legislative process, is to do the conditional zoning. And with that, you can also require, as we probably would, the pre-application meetings. So there would be there would be meetings with the community prior to the application. So instead of the quasi-judicial, which only allows for notice between 10 and 25 days prior to the hearing, there would be plenty of notice to everyone in the community about what's coming and an opportunity to talk with and ask questions of that developer. And then it would come to the council for a hearing, and some of the hearings still may be long. It may not save you time on the hearing, but it's a more open, informal process so you can hear from everyone. And from what we've heard from Cullowhee over the last couple of years, and really from our 441 council as well, and in droves from all of you in the Cashiers community over the last 6 months, this sounded like a way the community was interested in going. And from a staff standpoint and a legal standpoint, it's definitely a way we're interested in going, because we always want to have that community participation. And I'm happy to answer any legal questions you have with regard to the process.
Any members of the council have any questions for Heather or Michael?
So does the, this is Debbie, in case you guys can't see that I'm talking. So does it go down to the commissioners in Silva for the final vote at that point, or does it stay within the Cashiers realm of our little council?
Well, with the legislative decision, the council would vote on what their recommendation is to the commissioners, but ultimately the commissioners would vote, and so they would have the final decision, though, and Mike can talk to you even more on this point. Almost always the commissioners are going to look to their council and follow their recommendation. It would have to be something very unusual before they would not. They almost always follow the council recommendation. That's why they have you as a council. So you would still have that kind of say, though. You know, one thing that's possible and can happen in a legislative decision, and Mike, correct me if I get this wrong, but a development could come before you as the council. And they could hear from you, and you could maybe have problems with it or have issues that you raise or not recommended, and they could make those changes. They could take what you say, make those changes, and then when it goes to the commissioners, it could basically be a revised project based on what your feedback was. So that's a time that you might have a different decision at the commissioner level, but typically they're going to follow your recommendations.
And I think to follow up with what Heather was saying about conditions, you know, the conditional zoning process does allow for more of that in the middle of even during the time to address these issues as they pop up or as they're identified. You know, you still have to follow. There's still some legal framework about, you know, making sure that all the conditions are, you know, are agreed to and things of that nature, and that they're not unreasonable. You know, you couldn't say, hey, you got a development, but we want you to fix the road from Cashiers down to Silva. That wouldn't be a reasonable condition. So, I mean, there are limits to some of that, but beyond that, away from that example, I think that it does offer some more ability for developers in the community and the council to have more conversations about what these developments should look like or could look like. And certainly gives, I think, some more tools for the community to ensure the developments more readily match the vision of the area. Quasi-judicial processes are rigid, and as Heather was explaining to you, and it doesn't allow for a lot of this to take place, and it doesn't allow for the broader community to have direct input into the hearing process. So, I mean, there are limitations to that format. What we do see with conditional zoning is that it's a newer concept, and the state legislature has more recently approved it, probably over the last 10 years, as being something that can be that counties and cities can implement. But it's something that we see a movement towards in the planning community, because it does allow for some more community input, allows for some more flexibility in working at these developments to ensure that they're meeting, you know, getting closer to the goals of your adopted land use plans and small area plans and things of that nature.
Michael, just to clarify though, our decisions go on to the county planning board and then the county commissioners for vote. So that doesn't sound substantially different. I mean, I'm on that end of it.
It is not. I mean, I think that you can always, it's no different than a lot of the processes that we do. You would be acting if we switched over to conditional zoning. You would be acting the council would be acting in its legislative capacity, which is as an advisory board. You'd still hear the project. You'd still have to make a recommendation and vote on that recommendation and send that up to the planning board and to the into the Board of Commissioners. So that happens certainly a good deal with the work that you already do. It's just a little bit different. It's obviously different than the quasi-judicial process where your board would make a decision and then appeals would go to Superior Court.
Well, this is my thought at this point this evening. I mean, we obviously, it's been a longer meeting, and we still have yet to hear from Jake and his proposal,
right?
Or his report, I should say. It seems like there's interest in this. You, as the county, are recommending us to look at this. Maybe there on the next. At the next meeting, we can have this again as an agenda item. You guys can maybe in some kind of a graphic way show, we can just continue to discuss how this would differentiate from our current process. And that would give us more time to study it and think about it versus just continuing on tonight when we have a little bit more business. Are the other members of the council amenable to that if we continue to look at this in the next meeting?
Yeah, I agree with your thoughts, Michael.
Okay.
I obviously read what was sent, and it seems to make a lot of sense, and we probably do need to head in that direction, but I do think we need to spend some more time on it.
Okay. Anyone else from the council, or we just not hearing is going to make me think that we're in agreement to just continue this?
It's fine to continue it. I do think it's important that we definitely look at this, and get it in place sooner rather than later, simply because I think it's so important that we hear from the community that we haven't been able to before. And the longer we put it off, I mean, I understand tonight it's late, we're all ready for dinner, but next meeting's fine with me.
Okay. All right, well, let's continue looking at these differences. If Allison, if you would work on putting that on the next meeting's agenda. All right. Moving on to new business 4C, develop Cashiers responsibly presentation on maximum building size recommendation in the Cashiers small area plan. Is this just going to be a direct presentation from Jake Petrovsky, Michael?
That's my understanding. Jake, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and.
Can you hear me?
I got you.
Good to see you, Jake.
Hey, I remember you.
How's it going?
Jake, we're going to make you the host here to do your presentation.
Go ahead.
Sounds good. I know it's getting late, but I appreciate you all letting me share some thoughts with you. I won't take too much of your time. There is a memo that has been made available and will be made available that goes into more detail. So I'll just kind of hit the highlights here. This is just a zoning assessment and some recommendations that we produced on behalf of developer Cashiers responsibly. Just really looking at the zoning code as it is and coming up with some recommendations that could help it be more in line with the small area plan. And this is typically what happens, after a small area plan is adopted or a comprehensive plan for a county or town. In this case, it's a small area plan because it's a portion of Jackson County. But the plan, the small area plan is kind of a policy document, and it floats some ideas and sets a vision, and then it does make some specific recommendations, some policy guidance that should have some impact on future development and decisions. But when those recommendations become codified in the Unified Development Ordinance, when they become part of a zoning ordinance, that's really the law of the land and really what regulates development. So this is pretty typical of kind of a process. You do the small area plan, and then we look to codify what's in there. So the presentation of this and roughly the memo follows two things. There's an assessment. So we look at the standards in the existing zoning districts, and then highlights from the small area plan, and then some analysis that we've done of the built environment, which is really important. Everybody's talking about character tonight. How do you measure character? Well, you can actually measure it based on measuring the built environment and the natural environment and that sort of thing. Recommendations we have some short and long-term recommendations that talk about potential updates and improvements to the zoning ordinance for discussion purposes tonight, but also really hopefully into the future as well. So just looking at your existing regulated district, there's 2 zoning districts: Village Center District and then the General Commercial District. I won't go into a lot of detail here. The Village Center District really meant to reinforce that village character, more walkable, smaller scale, but generally, pretty permissive in terms of mixed uses. Then the General Commercial District is even more permissive from a mix of uses and allowable uses standpoint. It does have some different dimensional criteria, slightly bigger setbacks, and also some minimum lot widths, that sort of thing. The Cashiers Small Area Plan had a land use framework plan as part of it, and really talked about the different characters of different areas of Cashiers. You'll notice that there's more than 2 colors on this map. And that's fundamentally one of the things that we're talking about here is there's different parts of Cashiers, and those different character areas probably need to be treated differently in the long term in your zoning code. So in here we have the village core, and the village core, it doesn't necessarily line up really with the Village Center District. It's a little smaller in some places, so that's an important point. There's a transition area, and then gateways on 107 and 64, residential areas, and then also edge areas that are important. Won't go into a lot of detail there. The scale of new buildings was talked about in the small area plan. It did recommend considering increasing the height of buildings in the village center, again, to allow for that to really be the center of town. That was updated in the UDO, but that may need to be refined based on district. For instance, it might be appropriate in the village center district, perhaps in the gateway areas, but not necessarily, maybe not in the residential areas or in the general commercial areas. The small area plan also recommended an update to the UDO related to building footprints, considering a floor to area ratio maximum or a maximum building square footage in parts of the district. So that was recommended. So what we're doing here is just providing a little bit more detail on how to do that. The village core did have a district concept. So we did kind of look at that area and look about like how redevelopment could occur, and some small scale expansion of the village could occur as well. Important to this was a new connection between 107 and 64 that was really critical to enabling that. But if we look at this concept and quantify how big the buildings are, so this is again looking at what was in the plan and kind of quantifying the average building footprint in the village core was about 2,000 square foot. The max building footprint, and this is different than building total size, the max building footprint was 12,000 square foot. And those largest buildings were west of 107 in redevelopment areas of the existing core. If you look at just the southeast quadrant, so south of 64 and east of 107, there was 32 buildings shown, and some existing buildings preserved, and also the steep ridgeline preserved there as well. The average building footprint of there was 2,200 square foot, and then a maximum building footprint there was of 8,000 square foot. So I won't go into a lot of the natural resources and that sort of thing, but you can go into more of that detail if questions arise. The other thing we looked at was really quantifying existing buildings a little bit in the village core and in the transition area, which is adjacent to the village core and the small area plan, just to understand, okay, how big is everything now? Because if we're going to be setting a regulation and looking forward, we want to be able to have a reasonable level of confidence that we are reinforcing existing character when we say that's what we want to do. So this is a level of detail that we weren't really able to get at in the small area plan. So this is kind of neat that we were able to do this. In the village core, the average building footprint is about 4,000 square foot. The maximum building footprint is the 27,000 square foot recreation center. So that's an institutional use. About 11% of buildings have a building footprint of over 8,000 square foot, but all buildings with those larger footprints are close to a road. So within 400 or 500 feet of a main road. In the village core, southeast of the crossroads only, the average building footprint of existing buildings is 3,700 square foot. And then the largest building footprint is the Laurel Terrace Shops, but that was built prior to zoning. So keep in mind that zoning is a relatively new thing in Cashiers, that some might not realize that, but it is typical to see a zoning ordinance evolve, and hopefully that's what we're seeing, and what we'll see over the next couple of years, to just get more in line with what the community wants. In the transition area, the average building footprint was 2,500 square foot, and then there's an outlier, Freeman Gas, which was again built prior to the zoning ordinance. So, without going into too much detail, just to jump in the short-term recommendations, there's 4 short-term recommendations. One is set a maximum building size, so specifying a maximum building footprint size and floor to area ratio for the VC and GC zoning districts, and the ranges which are suggested is 8,000 to 12,000 square foot for the VC with a floor to area ratio of 1.4, which is similar to what Highlands has in their downtown. The general commercial district, 5,000 to 10,000 square foot with a floor to area ratio of 1.0. It would also be advisable to consider language to restrict larger buildings within a certain distance of major roadways, since that is how the existing village character is currently. So 400 or 500 feet, depending on how you measure the building and where do you measure, that sort of thing. The village center zoning district revision that is recommended is really about reducing the size of the village center zoning district and creating a new transitional residential zoning district. So this is really targeted at making your village center zoning district in line with the village core character area in the Cashiers small area plan. And then the creation of a new transitional residential zoning district would be to set a lower building footprint size and also a dwelling unit density maximum for new development to help new development in these areas fit kind of the character of existing and nearby uses. So what you have now is the village center district is a little too big and includes some residential areas. And also the general commercial district is really all encompassing. It includes kind of larger scale commercial areas, a lot of more residential areas, and that probably should be looked at in the long term as well. The other thing you might want to do is consider differentiating between the existing village center and the expansion area, but that's less important than the recommendation to shrink the village center. Just to illustrate what floor to area ratio is a little bit, there's different ways you can achieve a floor to area ratio of 1.0. For instance, you can cover the whole property with a building, which is unrealistic given you have parking requirements and stormwater requirements, that sort of thing, or half of the property. Same thing with a 1.5 floor to area ratio. You can kind of do it in a number of different ways there. Just want to illustrate that real quick. And the third short-term amendment recommendation is really to look at reducing lot coverage or impervious surface and increasing open space. Option 1 would be to reduce maximum lot coverage or impervious surface limit to 50% with the exception of redevelopment, and also consider reduced lot coverage and impervious surface allowance for steep slope areas. There's a big concern over grading and increased runoff and sedimentation on these steep slopes. You have some really steep slopes in Cashiers. The option 2 would be to increase open space requirements. So you can modify existing requirements that vary based on lot size, but based on the current code, increasing the requirement from 20 to 30% for larger developments would be advisable. And there's some more detail in what to do about the other ones, but either of these options would have a similar result. It would kind of shrink the building envelope in new development, increase open space, and reduce impervious surface. So that would be advisable. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Again, what we're trying to do with these recommendations is not say, this is the one way to do it, but begin the discussion, and Michael and his staff can certainly look into different options and work with the planning council and get input from the public to understand which is the best option. Number 4, update special use permit application requirements. And this would be a recommendation to amend the current special use permit process or current process if you change it for major development with a threshold to be discussed to include traffic impact analysis, demonstration of water and sewer availability and impacts, stormwater and sedimentation impacts in the plan, and erosion control plan, and then also concurrent subdivision application requirements. So that would be only for large scale development. Again, we wouldn't say that anything over 1,500 square foot would require that level of detail, but specifying something based on trip generation overall or acreage or one of those measures would be advisable. I got a couple of slides to just show kind of that existing zoning. This is the Cashiers small area plan character area recommendation. So they're different. The extent of that village center district is different. And so when you're looking at new districts, you might actually have something that's a little bit different, a little bit more nuanced. Part of the VC district actually becomes a residential transition area. Some of the GC district stays where it is, but then also you have a couple new districts, like a residential district and potentially a lakeside district, potentially a gateway district as well. Long-term recommendations include updating parts of the code that really deal with environmental and historic features. Thinking about a minimum tree protection requirement is something that is advisable. That could vary based on zoning district, but it is not necessarily just a good idea to require open space, but also requiring tree protection so that existing trees are preserved, and that influences what percentage of the site is graded and that sort of thing. Site analysis map that includes natural resources and historic features is something that could be included as a requirement in the submittal process. Conservation overlay district is something that could be targeted to some specific natural resources that you have in the area. You could look at requiring 40 or 50% open space in exchange for, some flexibility in lot width or some other dimensional requirement in exchange for more open space, more quality open space. And that can be targeted at steep slopes or designated natural heritage natural areas or areas in high in biodiversity or other special features. The review and approval process, we also kind of like where Mike and Heather are heading with considering and open it up to you all to consider the alternative to the special use permit process and the types of decisions approvals that are available and legal in North Carolina are shown on the right-hand side of this page. You have the administrative hearing, the legislative hearing, and the evidentiary hearing, which you currently have. But the legislative hearing is something that we would suggest considering, because it does allow for more interaction between the public and the council and developers and folks petition for approval. The other thing that's more long-term, and I've kind of mentioned along the way, but other zoning district edits. So expansion of the zoned area and introduction of new districts based on land use recommendations in the Cashiers small area plan. So whereas the village center district is really the priority in getting that right and introducing that transitional residential district, there are some other things that you might want to look at. Again, that general commercial district covers a lot of ground, and it has been good for Cashiers in the county and has regulated development for some time. But looking at refining it based on the different character areas that it encompasses is something that's recommended. And again, that might be more long-term, but we think it's beneficial. So that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do any of the other councilmen have any questions for Mr. Petrovsky? Jake, I have a couple questions while some people think of theirs. I think when we work together on this small area plan, some of these things like reducing the impervious surfaces and we actually decreased some vegetative requirements because we were actually trying to answer some community requests to build a more walkable place. And I thought we had discussed that you needed buildings a little closer together with a little less vegetation so people were incentivized to walk from place to place.
Yes, in the village core, that is certainly what we had discussed. And you don't want suburban buffers in your village center. You don't want to have big setbacks and planted buffers between the same uses, compatible uses. I think what our recommendation is really looking at something that affects new development outside the existing village core. And one way to do that would be impervious surface limitations. You could provide an exception for redevelopment. Like a lot of the lots downtown, they already have a lot of impervious surface. So you could do some kind of different, there's like smart codes or green codes that you can build back as long as you reduce by 10 or 15% and kind of make it better. That's one way to do it there. Or if you go the open space route and just increase minimum open space requirements, that only affects larger subdivisions. It could only affect bigger, larger subdivisions. So there you're only talking about things that are over 50 lots. And there's not a place in and around the kind of existing village core that is over 50 lots. So you wouldn't really be affecting them. So that's why that's kind of we included that as an option because we don't want to necessarily penalize redevelopment in the existing village core. Just like we talked about in the small area plan.
Jake, so you talked about why, and I mean, I think it's pretty clear why, to have a traffic study for the way we have our special use permit set up now would be sort of an undue burden on someone who might be just trying to build a small business for themselves. So right now our special use trigger is 1,500 feet. You're recommending sizes between 8,000 to 12,000 for the village core. What do you think would be an appropriate threshold where above this number should take a special use permit and these sorts of things, and below this number we could go with administrative approvals?
Well, we didn't really look into that. We just kind of assumed the special use threshold would stay in place. Or that special approval process would stay in place. Anything over the 1,500 square foot would stay in place, and then there would just be a maximum building footprint that would just govern kind of the overall maximum.
But you said that it would be. I mean, we can go back to that slide, but you said that you wouldn't consider that it would be a good idea to require some of these things at our present thresholds.
Right. Yeah. So you could specify.
So what would a good threshold be?
Well, for those additional application requirements, you could base it on trip generation. And we didn't look into what that threshold would be, but it could be an acreage-based threshold, or it could be, a daily trips. We looked at what does Black Mountain do? Black Mountain has a daily trip generation rate for new development around 700 daily trips. And you got to assume
that's like generated by what, the usage or the square footage?
Yeah. Yeah, there's general like ITE manual, standards for based on how many houses or how much square foot of commercial or whatnot. You can do it based on that trip generation rate, and that's a decent one. You could also do it based on administration determination. The town of Boone makes that administrative decision. the planning director determines what needs a traffic impact analysis based on what road is it on? Is it adequate, or does it have a lot of capacity or not? Or does it meet certain trip thresholds? And then you can look at other kind of peers. If you look at Aspen, Colorado, their bar is a lot lower. If you have more than 25 new lodge units, then you're required to do something, or more than 11 new residential units. So that's a low bar. And some of those ideas and different precedents are outlined in the memo.
Yeah. Michael, are there any, after I believe we got rid of that special use permit for 8 or more residential units, didn't we?
I think it was the two or more being built for residential units. Yeah, for like your single family homes.
So that's no longer in our ordinance. So right now, our ordinance makes no reference to any kind of restriction on residential improvement, residential development. Is that correct?
Right. And absent whether or not you're just building additional units, we've never really dealt with residential standards. Like there's no minimum lot size, there's no density set.
Well, there's a 50 foot minimum lot size in the GC, right?
Right. But that's for non-residential. I believe it, and John can jump in here. But based on what I understand from the history of it, the Cashiers zone district was really designed more about regulating commercial end development, not residential, at the crossroads area. So there's not a lot of regulatory framework for residential development within the zoned areas. It never has been, because it was really more aligned to putting some guidance and standards in place for commercial development. So I think that we haven't really been involved in a lot of residential regulatory framework.
So at this point, there is no reference to any regulation for residential in our present ordinance.
Or multifamily.
Well, multifamily, yes.
Okay, so there's just no reference to residential or
so detached. There is no reference to that. However,
there is reference to multifamily, but nothing for
for a subdivision, for example, if somebody wanted to come in and do single family detached. However, the subdivision ordinance would kick in at that point, not the Cashiers ordinance. It'd be the subdivision ordinance for the county.
So this is Jake. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. The council had began looking at implementing some rezoning, coming more from the edges, to be honest, and less from the center, to try to put some of the multiple zones that were called for in the small area plan. And we began to work on that, and it's taken up a lot of our time, this hillside development. Where are we with that, Michael?
Oh, I think with the development with COVID, and then with some of our staffing, we started putting some framework in place to create some of these districts like we call out in the small area plan. But I would say we're very much in a rough draft state of all that, and they're not really in. We've done some discussing, and we've kind of put some bones on it, but we're not to the point where I would say that any of those districts have been completed and are ready to be implemented. We're still working on discussing things like uses, what types of uses are appropriate in what districts, and moving forward with how we want to work and manage residential and some other concepts like that.
So, but it would be appropriate to continue to have this maximum building size discussion as part of that rezoning process, even if it doesn't touch on residential, because that's such a vastly larger thing, because we've never regulated residential before.
Yeah, I think you can go about it a couple different ways. I think when you talk about you can certainly look at it based in new districts. That takes a little more time to consider, because you're basically going to rezone. You're not going to. The way we had it set up is we weren't going to take in any area that wasn't already zoned, but we were basically going to rezone most of the district into more appropriate districts called for by a small area plan. and certainly that building conversation can be involved in that. The council may want to, though, look at building, the building size issue, with that in mind, but maybe want to proceed on that a little bit quicker. It will take a little bit of time when you develop new zoning districts. And so while we can have both those things in mind while we're doing that, the council may want to, based on the conversations you've heard tonight, may want to move a little quicker on having a conversation about what an appropriate building maximum size would be. And then we can always incorporate as we move through and create these districts. Because even as Jake notes, that those are typically longer term type of ventures to create
and that's what I was going to ask is, I mean, looking at the type of zoning, including for the first time ever residential, or not the first time ever, including it now where there is no mention of residential zoning in our ordinance, how long of a process would you think that sort of a rezoning process would take? And Jake, I'll throw it to you. Just in your experience, how long have you seen those zoning process where none has existed before take?
Well, Mike, let me jump in here real quick. It speaks to residential in the ordinance. It's just, it permits it everywhere in the jurisdiction for residential. So it does speak to it. There's no standards for residential, but it's listed in the use table, and they're both single family detached and single family attached are permitted in both districts.
Does multifamily have to follow the standards?
Multifamily would, that's permitted, but it would have to fit. We're talking about building standards, architectural standards.
Yeah. Understood. Jake, how long do you think a process of rezoning like this would take, in your professional opinion, having seen this in multiple different communities?
Well, I mean, it depends on a number of factors. How far along has staff gotten with those draft districts? That's one of the reasons why we structured the presentation like we did, the short-term versus long-term recommendations. The text amendments are easy, and I think the building size maximum, building footprint size maximum is something that could work even with future districts and future amendments. So, some of these are text amendments. The building size kind of fits that bill. The impervious surface or open space requirement fits that bill. That's a text amendment. The open space is a little bit different. You would have to create a separate open space requirement table that's unique to Cashiers and doesn't go under the county subdivision ordinance. But those are the two fairly lower hanging fruit. If you look at changing the extent of the village center district and introducing a new transitional residential district, that could take a little bit while longer because you have to draft the standards for the residential district. There has to be notifications, public hearings, and that sort of thing. So you're looking at a few months there.
Like a 6 to 12 month process?
Not just for one district and rezoning
but
modifying the larger effort. Certainly, if you wanted to go full blown and do all the districts and do an edge district and residential districts and a gateway district, and you'd have to write that code and especially if you were expanding the zoned area, that's a much bigger endeavor for sure. So you're looking at 6 months, 8 months for that. That's why those short-term recommendations are structured separately from these.
Let me ask you something about those short-term recommendations, wherein you gave some recommendations for various districts, the 8 to 12,000 for the village center and the 5 to 10 for the general commercial. Although, I mean, there are much larger buildings. How did you, in your study, did you measure Ingalls?
We did not look at the whole extent of the GC district. So that would be something you might want to do before you change that. But the village center district, we feel really good about just because we looked at kind of that, all the buildings in that area. But the general commercial district, we were generally looking at the transition area in that village center, or the general commercial district. So there are bigger buildings there. So that would be more like a placeholder that you would do until you do more work and then rezone or reallocate that general commercial district based on, kind of a more refined set of zoning districts.
So just one thing I noticed about your presentation, I do believe that the Freeman Gas building was actually one of the very first buildings that was created under the initial ordinance, which is what I've been told anecdotally. But so one of the things that came up in the small area plan in reference to the lake area, but also in reference to the center of town, is that a number of people said that one of the things that they wanted in Cashiers was a hotel. They wanted a hotel in the town. At the time, we didn't have a hotel. High Hampton's now opening back up. But how would you treat that with a maximum building size of 12,000 square feet? How would you, I mean, what's the average hotel size?
Well, one thing that we did say is we didn't really specify what the dimensional requirements would be for those new districts, because that would require a lot more work. So the Gateway District and the Lakeside District is where in the plan we said there could be slightly bigger buildings, if you remember. So, you know, those dimensional criteria will likely, need to be studied and could be, different than the VC district and could be slightly larger if that's the interpretation of where we're going to go with that.
Isn't it sort of inside out in terms of like walkability and everything else to have bigger buildings at the edges and smaller buildings in the center?
Well, you do get a sense of arrival at the edge on the gateway. I mean, and you do have to anticipate redevelopment of angles. So that was one of one driving factor. And you don't have kind of the historic character that you're trying to protect on those edges as much as you do in the center of town. And Lakeside is essentially a continuation, or it's really like the village center south, if you will. So you would have kind of good walkable access to the center there.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Jake or staff at this point? Okay. I think with this amount of interest, it's reasonable that we go ahead and we have an agenda item for anything that staff would want to continue to bring us, or for the council to continue to discuss this maximum building size recommendations, and actually add that as an agenda item at the next hearing. With that being said, if nobody else has any questions for Jake or staff, at this time, I'd ask for a member of the council to make a motion to recess the meeting for the mandated 24 hours.
And so we just probably need to talk about with the council dates that we can meet, and we can do it via Zoom, that would work for your calendar. Again, that would be the to finalize the meeting and having more discussion about the text amendment and any potential recommendation by the council. Certainly, you would.
Well, I can meet at 5 o'clock on Wednesday. Okay. Are you thinking this week, or are you thinking further out, Michael? What are you thinking?
I think we want to be clear of the 24 hours. So Wednesday would be the first day. And Heather, I know you're more up on that law than I am, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think it's just a 24-hour, correct?
It's just 24 hours. So 5 o'clock Wednesday would be perfect. And again, and just so people know, they've got 24 hours to continue to make comments. It's obviously not going to be in person to the council or by Zoom to the council. So that could be by email or phone call, but then that ends the public comment period. So at the hearing, so at the recess meeting on Wednesday would just be to take up this item. So it should not be a long meeting.
Okay, so if nobody disagrees, I'd go ahead and set this next meeting for 5 o'clock Wednesday. Okay.
And I think we just Heather, do we need to make that in the form of a motion?
Yes, somebody would need to make that motion, and then there would need to be a second and a vote to recess the meeting to 5 o'clock Wednesday.
Okay, if I could have a motion to that effect, please.
Motion to recess until Wednesday, 5 p.m.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second from Debbie. All in favor?
We need to do a roll call vote on that, Michael.
Oh, roll call. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Allison.
Glenn,
Aye.
Debbie,
Aye.
Bob? Bob Hughes,
Aye.
Mark? And Michael?
Aye.
I don't know. Mark's unmuted, but I don't know what's happening.
Raise your hand if you are voting aye, Mark. We can't hear you. Raise your hand if you're voting aye.
Okay, see ya.
Okay.
It's unanimous. See, who was that?
Robin, right? We still need Robin.
Oh,
And
sorry, I
Robin, yes.
almost forgot about you, Robin. Robin, are you there?
Is she right there?
We might have lost Robin.
She's here.
I'm here.
Okay, are you in favor of recessing till 5 o'clock Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay. All right, see everyone Wednesday. That's a unanimous vote.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Have a good night.